Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 7 of What If Naruto Life has been turned into a RPG game. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. A week later. Hokage's office, Hokage Tower. I see you have both taken the opportunity to update your equipment, young Kunoichi. The Hokage stated with a nod as they examined the 3 genin standing in front of him. Naruto just grinned from where he stood at the center of the formation. He was dressed in his casual ninja outfit, with the only new addition being a heavily armored bracer secured to his left forearm. According to the young Jinchuriki, it had been a reward earned for aiding in the start of reconciliation between his 2 teammates. Sakura blushed slightly as shuffled under the elder Kage's gaze. Her red battle dress had been swapped out with a similarly colored top and skirt, with the thin slip of her belly left uncovered, showing it was now protected by an armored mesh shirt that went up under her top and was reinforced to better protect her chest. She also now had a matching set of greaves and bracers protecting her shins and forearms, as well as a set of metal-backed combat gloves over her hands. Her hair had also been tied back into a ponytail similar to Ino's. Though she'd kept her original black spats, the edges just visible under the edge of her skirt. Ino mere huffed lightly, crossing her arm under her budding bust. Her outfit had remained mostly the same, save for the addition of a set of light greaves and bracers and the mesh armor that was now occasionally peeking out from beneath her clothes and bandages. It gladdens me to see the next generation taking their first steps into the world so seriously. The Hokage continued with a firmer, approving nod. I've always believed it was foolishness for even genin to ignore having at least some basic protection in their uniforms. Even if it is not expected for you to enter combat on every mission, a shinobi should always make at least some preparation should the worst occur. His piece said, the Hokage reached out and began shuffling through the papers scattered across his desk. Sarutobi's eye briefly lingered on the pile of scrolls that occupied his left-hand side, each detailing a D-rank mission he would normally assign to genin teams at random. However, since Naruto's unique gamer ability had manifested the ability to allow him to freely select which mission his team would be assigned, Sarutobi had taken to testing it slightly on occasion. His tests so far had revealed that, while Naruto's unique ability seemed to have some control over random chance, or perhaps even subconscious decision-making, it was far from all-powerful. If he selected a specific mission for his son's team an hour before they arrived, for example, Naruto's ability would not grant him a choice, instead simply informing him of the mission Hiruzen had selected. He'd also ordered Naruto to select a specific once and then purposefully selected a different one, causing the mission Naruto had selected to be cancelled, and the one he selected to take its place. These discoveries had actually relieved the aging shinobi somewhat. An ability that allowed someone to overwrite reality or another's free will so thoroughly, far surpassing even the Yamanaka clan's ability to manipulate or control their targets' minds, would have been a far too dangerous thing to leave alone. Today he had a special mission in mind for his son's team, and he was curious to see if Naruto's unusual power would somehow highlight it and affect his ability to select it at random. Back to the matter at hand, you are all here for a mission, are you not? Let us see what we have available. He offered aloud, reaching absently toward the pile, his eyes discreetly studying Naruto as he extended his arm. In between 1 second and the next, Naruto's disposition suddenly seemed to shift from relaxed and slightly laid back to tense and alert, with his expression and body language seemingly lagging behind a second or two to adjust to this apparent shift in attitude. The difference between the 2 shifts was subtle, and it was only Hiruzen's years of experience as a shinobi, leader and negotiator, and the fact that he'd been actively watching for any sudden changes that allowed him to notice the inconsistency. Oh dear, I wonder just what kind of trouble this is going to bring. Sarutobi briefly pondered before continuing on with grabbing and unfurling the scroll he'd been reaching for. It was, after a quick glance, the one he'd been hoping to offer to Team Asuma. Did that mean that Naruto's ability had given him some insight onto the mission that he wasn't aware of just yet? Putting the concern to one side for now, he continued with the plan he'd originally prepared for this specific mission. Yes. It appears that Team 10 has been specifically requested for a mission by the client, always a pleasant surprise when that happens. Ichiraku Ayame is going to be heading out to pick a large order of ingredients from one of the nearby villages and is requesting an escort there and back. Wait a minute, are we actually leaving Konoha for this? Ino asked, blinking in surprise. I thought that D ranks could only take place in Konoha. Anything outside the village is C rank or up. Ah, that's a common misconception, Ino. Yumino Uruka, his assistant for the time being, offered kindly. The younger man was an excellent aide and organizer, and Hiruzen would honestly be saddened to lose him when the academy restarted and he was assigned a new class. Were it not for both his passion and capability when it came to teaching the seedlings that would grow into the next generation, the Sandaime would have been long tempted to poach the younger man from the academy for his personal staff. Konohagakure's territory actually extends a good 20 miles beyond the walls of the village. There are several training grounds and facilities placed in the area that, for security or safety reasons, are not housed in the village proper, as well as several clan-owned properties, the Nara clan's deer reserve being one prime example. In addition to that, there are also over a dozen small villages that act as way stations for merchant caravans, couriers and other civilian needs making their way to and from Konoha as well as serving as farming and animal husbandry centers to supply the village with food. Given the security of the area being directly under Konoha's aegis, it is considered safe enough that any mission as long as it remains within that territory can still considered a D rank, albeit a high D rank at least. The trio of genin took a moment to process the impromptu lecture before it was surprisingly Sakura who broke the silence. Well, it can't be any worse than having to chase after that damned cat again. The pink-haired Kunoichi offered with a shudder. Sarutobi hid a small smile behind his laced hands. Yes, Madame Shijimi's cat, Tora, had been an unholy terror since shortly after she was gifted to her as a kitten by the, then still thriving, Uchiha clan. Forcing the genin to chase and retrieve the feline menace had become something of a rite of passage among Konoha's shinobi in recent years. Naruto had already reported that Tora was apparently level 40, so it was very likely that the beast wasn't even taking its pursuers seriously, instead simply treating the entire affair as some form of game for its own amusement. You can be assured, Tora is truly one of a kind. He offered, letting out a light chuckle as he noticed young Ino's twitching eye. That's right, she was the one who'd gotten most severely scratched when they'd last pursued Tora, including a rather large X across the center of her face. Unless a mission takes you to the capital, you'll be unlikely to encounter her outside of one of Madame Shijimi's visits. Unfortunately for the genin of Konoha, Madame Shijimi was rather fond of their village and regularly spent at least 1 or 2 weekends out of every month, visiting the Leaf Village. Demonic little. The Yamanaka heiress hissed out through grit teeth. Ahem, back to the matter at hand. The Hokage interrupted, preventing another rant against Tora, the genin hazing cat, by one of her disgruntled victims. Your mission is set to start at 8 o'clock sharp tomorrow morning. You are to meet your client at the main gates. As this will be your team's first mission outside the village proper, your Jonin-sensei will be going over exactly what your mission kits will require. As this mission is expected to take only 4 days at most, an abbreviated kit should suffice. Roger that, Hokage-sama. Asuma agreed with a lazy grin. Team 10 formally accepts the mission. Kids, meet me outside in 10 and I'll go over what's expected as part of your kits. I've got a few things I need to discuss with the big boss. The girls nodded and quickly turned to leave, and with Iruka already busy with more paperwork, only the 2 Sarutobi noticed Naruto flashing a message in Konoha sign language. Bloodline activated. Serious concerns. Request meeting at convenience. That certainly didn't bode well. The Hokage sent a quick, understood, sign back before Naruto left with his team. He just hoped that it wouldn't be too serious. Later. Living room, Uzumaki Naruto's apartment, Amekage Apartments. Naruto was not in a good mood as he glared at the window floating in front of him as if it was Mizuki returned to mock him. Quest alert. For the love of ramen, Ichiraku Ayame has hired your genin team to escort her to the village of Arakusa, a small relay station and farming community located on the very edge of Konoha's outer patrol perimeter, in order to pick up a delivery of ingredients from Nanokuni. Arakusa, while small, is an important rest point for many caravans heading into and out of Konoha, making it a tempting target for the likes of bandits and Nuke Nin. Quest Objective 1. Escort Ichiraku Ayame to the Shukuba Post Station, in the village of Arakusa. Quest Objective 2. Guard Ichiraku Ayame while she collects the ingredient delivery. Quest Objective 3. Escort Ichiraku Ayame back to Kanahagakure, taking care to protect the produce as well. Quest Failure. Death of Ichiraku Ayame, death of yourself. Quest Reward 1. Plus 1000 XP, plus 500 reputation with Ichiraku Ayame. Quest Reward 2. Plus 500 XP, plus 1000 Ryo. Quest Reward 3. Plus 10,000 Express, plus 1000 Ryo. Honored Reputation with Ichiraku Tsuki, error. Reputation already maxed, honored Reputation with Ichiraku Ayame, error. Reputation already maxed. This quest has been accepted. There were so many things about this particular mission that were setting off Naruto's internal alarms that he honestly didn't know where to start. The fact that both he and his surrogate sister could be killed if the mission failed was a big one, or maybe it was the fact that the third objective's rewards were so disproportionately large compared to the prior two that was setting him off so badly. Seriously, 10 times the experience, 20 times the Ryo and 3 mystery items was just screaming that something major was going to happen on the way back to the village. Another, far more subtle, warning had been the mention of bandits and Nuke Nin in the initial quest blurb. The gamer was many things, but so far it hadn't proven itself to be capable of all that much subtlety at even the best of times. If the thing was specifically mentioning those in a quest description, then he was willing to bet his ramen that they were going to show up in some way or form. Conclusion. Something very rotten was going on here. He'd already decided that he was going to be heading out tomorrow with a full combat loadout. He'd be wearing the storm suit and carrying Sumaire, Tsubaki and Kogetsu Kyushiki in addition to his usual shuriken and kunai complement. He'd also have to make sure that his teammates were at least armed with something better than their normal kunai and shuriken, since neither had settled on their own weapons just yet. He'd loaned Sakura his collapsible spear. It was by far the easiest weapon he had to work with, and she'd have plenty of time to at least get the basics down while they were journeying to Arakusa. Ino would be getting his chakra blade. She was the more physically capable of the pair and likely had at least some basic blade training from her clan, so she should be able to handle the enlarged, kunai-like blade fairly easily. He'd already sent out a cage bunchen to get holsters for them both, thigh-mounted ones. They'd be the easiest to get a hold of and use. Fortunately, the Higurashi store had plenty of those in stock and even had a made-to-order section if they didn't have anything in stock that fit the two, admittedly oddly shaped, blades. When Gigi showed up, with Asuma-sensei quickly following at his heels, he immediately invited the both of them into a party and showed them the quest information, pointing out everything that was setting off red flags in his eyes, as well as what he was already planning on doing to help mitigate the risks to himself and his teammates. Why did you even accept the quest if just seeing it has gotten you this worked up? Asuma asked with a frown on his lips as he chewed his cigarette in thought. Ayame-ne-chan is going to go and pick up those ingredients whether I accepted it or not. Naruto answered without hesitation. If she goes alone, then whatever shit is waiting to break loose will hit her while she's alone and unprotected. There's no way in hell that I'm letting that happen. A fair enough point. Gigi nodded with an approving smile. It was just like young Naruto to put protecting those that he cared for ahead of his own safety without hesitation. Truly, the will of fire burned brightly in the young Jinchuriki. What we need to discuss now is whether your team will need backup or not. If Nuke Nin are going to be involved in a raid against one of Konoha's perimeter villages, then as Hokage I cannot allow it to go unanswered. If we apply video game logic to this, then I can really only see two things happening if you do that, Gigi. The last Uzumaki offered with a frown. 1. A random event will happen that will draw away or distract whatever backup you send away from the main event and keep them from interfering. 2. They'll show up and get involved, but the enemies will also turn out to be stronger to even things out. That does sound like something that would happen in a video game. Konohamaru mentioned it once, power scaling he called it. Asuma muttered. He'd asked his nephew a bit about video games since he'd discovered his students' unique abilities and had gotten a crash course on the subject and the common terminology involved. He let out a brief sigh before continuing, so sending a squad of Anbu might just make things even worse. If that's the case, it would probably be best to keep it low scale, maybe pull in another team from the Genin platoon. Come up with an excuse to send them in the same direction on the same timeframe. Kurenai, Guy or Kakashi's teams would likely work best in this kind of situation, give us another reason to keep the kids together. Hiruzen nodded thoughtfully, silently agreeing with his son's appraisal. Team Guy is already out of the village, attending to AC rank in Kawa no Kuni. I'm afraid Team 7 is still suffering from far too many interpersonal issues to warrant them receiving a high D rank mission outside of the Tora missions. However, Team 8 has been showing excellent growth lately and Kurenai-kun has stated that she believes that they are ready for a higher ranking mission. They might well be our best choice for this. The Hyuga heiress, Nara heir and Akamichi heir all under the command of Konoha's Genjutsu mistress. Asuma stated with a grin. Mix them in with Konoha's number 1 unpredictable ninja, the Yamanaka heiress and this year's top Kunoichi under the Smoking Guardian and I'd say we have quite the potent little group. Indeed. If need be, Ino can work with Shikamaru and Choji in order to make use of formation, Ino Shika Cho. The Hokage agreed. It should also help minimize the risk of this power scaling phenomenon occurring, particularly considering that Kurenai-kun was only promoted to Jonin less than half a year ago. Plus, she's a genjutsu specialist. Asuma added. When he noticed Naruto giving him a curious look at the odd statement he elaborated. Genjutsu specialists don't tend to power types, kid. They specialize in technique, skill, subterfuge and cunning, not raw power. And power seems to be the big indicator for your abilities level determinations. Decision made, the two adults left, allowing Naruto to return to his own preparations. Opening up his inventory, Naruto pulled out the random piece of equipment he'd earned for turning in the second of the Shidaime's Mokuden journals, a trick gauntlet. Designed to be used as a part of shinobi armor, it functioned exactly the same as a lightly armored coat but could be loaded with up to 4 gadget add-ons, of which it had come pre-equipped with 1, a repelled grapnel line launcher. He'd already sent out a score of his Kage Bunshin to search throughout Konoha for any additional add-ons for his newest piece of gear. He wasn't going to hold his breath, but if he got lucky and they found something that looked like it would work they had orders to purchase it and bring it back immediately. The other special reward, the one he'd received from the Hokage, had been a particular treasure trove, a treatise on futon and doden ninjutsu written by the old man himself. Absorbing it had raised both his natural primary wind affinity and his secondary earth affinity by 2 levels each. And thanks to his duplication system, he still had an actual copy of it in his inventory to use as he saw fit. The jutsu scroll that he'd been able to assemble from the scroll fragments he'd collected while going through TG-13 with Sakura and Ino had been a disappointment. It was a genjutsu scroll, genjutsu, Kyokan no Akari, illusion technique, Rage of the Mad Dog to be specific. According to what he'd been able to glean from actually physically reading through the scroll, it was one of the few genjutsu that the Kimono clan used, usually as a technique of last resort or to create a distraction. It could be used to target someone else or the user themselves, sending the target into a berserk fury for a set duration of time. Naruto supposed he could see how it could be useful. Throw it on a guard or an enemy and they'd go berserk, drawing attention away and allowing the user to sneak by in the chaos or land a sneak attack. Use it on yourself and you have a brief boost of berserker strength and speed in a dire situation, albeit at the cost of throwing yourself into a frenzy. Definitely not what you'd normally expect from a ninja, but he supposed that element of surprise was part of how well it could work. Again though, Naruto still couldn't use it even if he wanted to. Requirement. Average chakra control was a fucking wall that was keeping him from learning any form of genjutsu for the time being. In the end, he decided to hand it over to Gigi so that someone in the village might get some use of it. The old man had thanked him and then handed him a cash reward for donating a jutsu to the Konohagakure ninja forces. He certainly wasn't going to turn down an extra 10,000 ryo. That's all I can do for now. I need to unwind. Some shuriken jutsu practice before my nightly fuinjutsu practice will do the trick, the blonde boy decided as he got up and stretched slightly. I need to make sure I get plenty of rest tonight. Not only is it my first out-of-village mission, but I already know that it's going to go pear-shaped. I need to be at my best. Suiting actions to words, Naruto turned and headed off for the Shurikenjutsu range. The next day, morning. Great Gates of Konohagakure. Geez, Naruto. You look like you're heading out to a battlefield rather than a simple escort mission. Ino stated dryly, not so subtly eyeballing her fellow blonde in his current outfit. He looked, honestly pretty impressive. He was dressed in a blue t-shirt with a red spiral on the chest under a dark blue, waist-length jacket with an armored plate on his left shoulder and a patch of the same red spiral symbol as his t-shirt stitched on the opposite shoulder. His trousers were of the same design as his jacket, with armored portions protecting both his knees. He had two different armored coat covering his forearms, with the left obviously more heavily armored than the right, and she could see the sheathed forms of all three of his swords, the two tanto sheathed in the small of his back and the kodachi over his right shoulder. She absently adjusted the new holster that was strapped to her own left thigh, which held the goddamned master-crafted chakra blade he'd given to her just minutes ago. She was honestly still reeling a bit from that. The sheer amount of ryo you'd have to pay for a blade like that wasn't something her entire clan could just dismiss. She'd actually been more than a bit relieved when he'd told her that he was just loaning it to her for the duration of the mission, the same with the collapsible spear he'd handed Sakura. Seriously, both of those were master-crafted items. Giving a kunoichi a gift like that was basically declaring your intent to court her in the most shinobi way possible. Ino would forever deny that her heart had skipped a beat when he'd told her about how good it was. It's our first mission outside the village. I thought it'd be a good way to test my full battle uniform, even if I just end up wearing it constantly for a week or so. Naruto responded with a shrug. Not a bad idea, kid. And you look pretty sharp while doing it. Asuma-sensei offered approvingly from where he was leaning on a nearby wall. The Jonin honestly didn't look any different from usual, save that he wasn't smoking one of his usually ever-present cigarettes. He was keeping an eye out for their client as their team had all arrived several minutes early, as was expected for shinobi on a mission, and they were due any minute now. Sorry, am I late? Ichiraku Ayame called as she hurried over to them. Rather than dressed in the Ichiraku ramen outfit that Ino was now used to seeing the older girl in, the civilian was currently dressed in sensible traveling clothes with a large backpack slung over her shoulders. Damn it Oyaji, why did you have to choose this morning to mess with the showers? No need to worry, Ichiraku-san. You're right on time, we just arrived a bit early. Asuma reassured the young lady with a pleasant smile. Well, that's a relief. The brunette let out a small sigh and offered the older man a grateful smile before she spotted Naruto. Wow Naruto, those are some serious-looking clothes. You look so cool. She offered brightly. Hey. Thanks, Ayame-ne-chan. The blonde grinned at her with a blush. So how are we gonna get your delivery back to the village anyway? You have a cart reserved at the Shukuba or something? Nope. Ayame chirped happily, momentarily pulling off her bag and reaching into it. A moment later her hand came back out gripping a long, slim scroll. I've got a dozen storage scrolls with me, all designed for bulk food storage. My dad had a friend back when I was a little girl who was a dab hand in Fuinjutsu and they made them specifically for the restaurant in exchange for a year's worth of free ramen. These babies have made ordering, transporting and storing ingredients for the restaurant Child's Play for over a decade now. She explained, replacing the scroll and holstering her pack back onto her back. Dad used to just hire a genin team for AC rank to pick them up using them, but I've been doing it myself for the past few years since I've got awakened chakra coils myself. He still insists on me getting an escort though. Impressive craftsmanship if they're still working so well after a decade of regular use. Asuma offered with a nod. Sakura merely blinked, staring at the civilian girl in confusion. How do you even have awakened coils? Oh, I was actually an academy student for a while. I was pretty good too, if I do say so myself. Top 5 in my year, every year. Shame I had to drop out in my 3rd year after Mum died. The ramen chef answered with a sad smile. Dad didn't take it well and he needed me at home. Oh well, no use getting all morose over might have beens, right? So, when are we heading out? Whenever you're ready. Asuma replied with an easy smile. We're at your disposal, miss. Hey, alright then. Let's head out. Ayame declared with a grin. As their group was in the middle of signing out with the gate guards, Team 8 joined the small queue of groups leaving the village. Hinata managed a shy wave of her own, while blushing up a storm, when Naruto suddenly noticed her and began to wave enthusiastically. Yo, Kurenai. Asuma greeted his not-so-secret crush. Don't tell me your team earned themselves a C rank already. Unfortunately not, just a high D rank, much like your own team I assume. The red-eyed beauty replied with a casual shake of her head. The Hokage requested that we deliver a message to the leader of the Boundary Patrol Corps currently stationed in Arakusa village. Thankfully, the message isn't urgent, so we'll be using it as a training mission to get my kids used to traveling outside the village. Huh, that's actually where we're heading. Ino offered with a blink. Wonder why he didn't just ask us to deliver it if the message isn't that urgent. Technically, he couldn't since we've already been hired out by a civilian. Her sensei pointed out simply. That kind double dipping is frowned on by clients. Besides, Oyaji isn't the type to put all his eggs in one basket like that, it's an old habit he picked up living through all three great ninja wars. He was probably hoping we'd meet up and work together on our own. You interested? He asked, looking to his fellow Jonin. Of course. It's good experience for them, both for escort missions and for working with other teams. Kurenai agreed. Great. I'm going to be stuck dealing with the troublesome blonde duo again. Shikamaru grumbled unhappily. What was that? Ino roared in anger at her childhood friend. Shikamaru, I have been telling you that acting like that is exactly why your mother and Ino react the way they do. Kurenai crossed her arms and frowned at her laziest genin. You need to learn that not everyone shares your opinion or needs to hear it. If you learn to control that tongue of yours, you'd likely find yourself dealing far less scoldings. That'll be a black mark on you before we've even officially started the mission. Ino, learn to keep that temper of yours in check. Shouting like that in public is unprofessional. Asuma added his own reprimand. Hi, Asuma-sensei. Ino frowned but nodded. Hi, Kurenai-sensei. Shikamaru groaned out. Once both teams were signed out along with Ayame, they quickly set out along the road. A few hours later. With Naruto. The blonde Uzumaki relaxed as they walked along the road, or so it would seem to any unaware observer. In fact, he was actually fairly alert, keeping an eye out on the road and its environs. He wasn't taking any chances with his surrogate elder sister's safety. He mentally reviewed the various armor pieces he was wearing, not including his t-shirt. Storm armor, light version. Very rare. A suit of modern light shinobi battle armor. Created in Arashi no Kuni, it is made from the skin of a Raiju, a powerful cat chakra mutation that requires a team of Chunin to hunt and slay it. Treated with a unique version of the leather curing process, the protective aspects of the skin, already phenomenally strong for basic animal hide, is enhanced severalfold. Crafted from the skin of a beast that constantly crackled with lightning, this armor offers its wearer extra protection against chakra-created forms of electrical energy, absorbing and dissipating a certain amount of energy before it can reach them. The armor is also highly modifiable, capable of adding further protections to itself in exchange for a slight sacrifice of mobility, or removing sections to account for tropical location in exchange for less overall protection. The metal shoulder pad currently attached to it is designed to carry up to 4 Fuinjutsu scripts in order to customize the suit to better fit the user's fighting style. Level 16. Def. Plus 50 to all covered locations. Durability. 250/250ths. Shoulder pad Fuinjutsu. 1 Fuinjutsu. Kiji Boe Sealing Jutsu. Cloth armor. 2 Chakra storage seal linked to seal number 1 full. 3 Weight reduction seal -50%. 4 Passive chakra absorption seal, linked to seal number 2 currently inactive. Effect. Lightning negation, can negate up to 50 points of damage per jutsu that are of the lightning element. It was a very good set of armor, and the shoulder pad that Higurashi Tatsuhiko had custom made to take the place of the original one had an awesome effect. 4 pieces of Fuinjutsu on 1 piece of metal. He was awesome. Armored coat, left arm. Uncommon. A coat made with the sole purpose of protecting the arm that carries it. It is an old style of shinobi battle wear, made mostly obsolete in recent years in favor of lighter armors that allow for greater speed and maneuverability. Still, it is more than capable of being used as a shield from close combat attacks. Initially made popular by Sarutobi Hiruzen as a part of his war regalia as the Sandaime Hokage during his first reign as Hokage. Level 15. Def. Plus 50 to left arm only. The coat he'd gotten from helping Ino and Sakura wasn't all that special, but it would make a useful shield if he was fighting another weapon user up close. Trickster's coat right arm. Rare. A coat specially designed to combine protection with utility. While only lightly armored and providing minimal protection, the majority of the coat's internals can have various devices and gadgets added into them. While none of the small devices that it is capable of carrying are particularly dangerous or lethal, a clever ninja can find numerous uses for this unconventional tool. Level 17. Def. Plus 2-5 to right arm only. 2 out of 4 add-on slits filled. Front slot. Grapnel line. A chakra-powered launcher can fire a miniature grapnel line, made of highly flexible and strong metal, from a concealed slot in the front of the coat. It has a maximum length of 25 meters and is strong enough to bear 2 fully grown men. It also has a chakra-fueled auto-retract system allowing the wearer to withdraw it quickly and rapidly when needed. Mid-slot 1. Mechanical shuriken launcher. A device built into the midsection of the coat, it can fire a smaller than average shuriken at an enemy. A distraction more than anything else, but these little shuriken are real and can leave a nasty cut when they hit. Magazine size. 6. Mid-slot 2. Empty. Rear slot. Empty. It had been a stroke of incredible luck when one of the clones he'd sent out yesterday had come back after finding not only the mechanical shuriken launcher add-on, but a huge box full of the prepared shot shuriken that it used as ammunition in the same pawn shop. He now had over 1,000 of the little buggers and all it had cost him was a measly 200 ryo. Apparently, the thing had been lying in the shop for over 5 years and no one had any idea what it was for. The best part about the trickster's coat was that it was designed to let the add-ons be interchanged quickly. It only took about 20 seconds to pop one out and replace it with a new one. Granted, some of the add-ons were restricted to specific slots within the coat. The shuriken launcher could only be placed in one of the mid-slots for example, but it was still incredibly useful. Absently, Naruto opened his status window. Name: Uzumaki Naruto. Class: The Gamer Plus. Level: 18. Next level: 99.49%. Title: Genin plus 15% XP to LV25 plus. Age: 12. HP: 4108 4108. CP: 4061 4061. STR: 43. Santa: 46 plus 10. Dex: 45. Int: 41 plus 5. Wis: 37. Luck. He had to bite back a frustrated scream, he still hadn't leveled up. It was maddening after how long it had taken to get so close, only to be stopped by a freaking half a percent. The delay he could kind of understand, he'd been so busy with team training and D ranks, not to mention the responsibilities his new job as a goddamned landlord kept adding to his plate, that he simply didn't have enough time to visit the training ground and go on a good hunt. He knew that he was one more dead enemy away from leveling up, which was why he was keeping a hungry eye out for any possible targets to make themselves available. Was it bloodthirsty? Maybe it a little, but Naruto really wanted that level up. Besides, with both Kurenai-sensei and Asuma-sensei here, along with himself, any run-of-the-mill bandits would likely run for the hills once they realized what they were facing. Sakura, Ino, Kurenai-sensei and Ayame were at the front of their impromptu formation, talking about something and occasionally exchanging giggles. Naruto didn't know and didn't want to know. He was just keeping well away from it while Shikamaru was dragging his heels at the rear of the group with Choji loyally plodding along beside his best friend. That left him, Asuma-sensei and Hinata at the center of the group. Even without actually intending to, they were in a loose, protect the client, formation. A Jonin and 2 Genin in front, with the client, 2 more Genin and another Jonin, and 2 more Genin at the rear. Not bad for an unconscious effort in Naruto's opinion. Anyo. Naruto-kun. Hinata asked him shyly. What's up, Hinata? He replied with an easy grin. You've gotten much stronger, see, congratulations on starting, on the path to your dream. The Hyuga heiress said, clearly mustering a lot of her willpower to speak so clearly. Hey, thanks, Hinata. Naruto said, rubbing the back of his head bashfully. It was a lot of work, but it was worth it. See, could we practice together? Once we stop for the day? Hinata asked. Unseen by the two genin, Kurenai was giving her only kunoichi student an encouraging smile, while Sakura and Ino felt frowns trying to form on their faces for some reason. Ayame was just amused by the entire situation, who knew her pseudo-little brother was growing into such a heartbreaker. Sure thing. I don't know anything about the gentle fist that you use, but maybe I can help you with your throwing technique. Naruto offered. As they started talking about training options, Asuma had to hide a smile. Kurenai-chan did say that her girl was carrying quite the torch for the kid, but I didn't think she'd put her best foot forward so soon. Looks like having two pretty girls on Naruto's team, including his schoolyard crush, is giving the girl a lot of motivation to try and get his attention. Though it looks like the kids actually realize that the girl is interested in him, which is a bit of a surprise. I wonder how. The gamer. Oyaji did mention that one of the things it could do was show how well he was regarded by people, organizations, villages and even nations. So, it likely showed him just how highly the little lady thought of him. Asuma silently shook his head. The sheer number of powers this gamer thing seemed to offer its holder was just plain unfair. Honestly, I'm just glad it ended up in the kid's hands. If it had landed in the midst of someone like Danzo or one of his little cronies, then he'd likely already been abusing it to try and overthrow Oyaji by now. The bearded Jonin paused, before chuckling. Then again, Naruto does want to become Hokage himself, he just plans to take the hat legitimately and let the old man retire again. I can agree with that, Pops is well overdue for a bit of R&R. Later. Courtyard, Yanagi Inn, farm village of Kochi. The key to handling a polearm weapon is all in the grip. Asuma offered as he adjusted Sakura's hands until they grasped the spear correctly. You've got to get the strength behind it just right. Too tightly and your grip gets brittle and any decent impact will cause you to lose your hold. Too loose and your weapon will slip right out of your hands when you meet any resistance. Good. Just like that, now run through that kata I showed you. Hi. The Pinkett nodded, and started following the basic stab swipe return kata that he'd shown her. As he watched his student, Asuma snuck a look over to where Naruto was giving Ino a bit of help in using the chakra blade he'd loaned her. Just channeling chakra into it creates a regular blade like this one. The Uzumaki air demonstrated with the blade, a larger, sharper construct of glowing blue energy forming around the blade as did so. Its size and shape are preset by the fuinjutsu placed on the blade. But that's just the most basic use. What do you think would happen if you tried channeling elemental chakra into it? I'd have an elemental blade. The Yamanaka heiress guessed. Yup. Naruto confirmed before changing the chakra he put into the blade from neutral chakra to futon chakra, creating a barely visible blade that let off a shrill, high-pitched sound with every movement. This is a futon chakra blade. The seals on the blade automatically make it like a fixed-strength version of the chakra nagashi no jutsu, giving it an edge that can cut though almost anything datbeo. I'm a primary Kaden affinity. What's the chakra blade going to do if I channel Kaden chakra? Ino asked. I think it's basically the same as a Kaden chakra nagashi, which would be a burning edge and maybe an explosive force behind each hit. Naruto guessed. Neither of my elements are fire. I only ever use wind and earth with the chakra nagashi no jutsu. You've got it right, Naruto. Asuma called over, still watching Sakura's practice. There you go. Anyway, you've barely started using Kaden chakra, so you probably won't be able to use the Kaden chakra blade for more than a couple of seconds. Naruto said to Ino. For now, try to get used to wielding the blade and trying out the regular chakra-enhanced blade. I'm gonna be over with Hinata to practice our shurikenjutsu if you need me. Huffing, Ino started practicing her swings with the short sword, adjusting her kata from the kunai portion of the Hokage style to take into account the chakra blade's larger blade size and greater weight. Shikamaru, you will be training. Kurenai stated curtly to her lazier student, who'd simply laid down on the grass when they'd exited the inn for some evening training. If you do not only will I dock your pay, I'll inform your mother that you have been goofing off, again. Troublesome. The Nara heir grumbled. Reluctantly, he heaved himself up from where he'd been cloud watching and started practicing his Kajimane no Jutsu, shadow possession technique. Choji was doing a basic taijutsu workout, after which he would be practicing the Buban Baika no Jutsu, partial multi-size technique, a fairly chakra-intensive jutsu that Choji wasn't yet able to use in combat due to its large chakra cost. Wow, you guys are really going all out. Ayame observed to Naruto and Hinata as they practiced their Hiko Yoshin fast draw technique. According to Asuma-sensei, all the inns in the villages inside of Konoha's inner and outer patrol envelope were set up so genin on high D ranks could train and practice while traveling between the villages. It was a courtesy that innkeepers incorporated to encourage passing shinobi to stay at their businesses. Can't get better without training. Naruto said before sending a cluster of shuriken into the target Kun set up for them, clustered in and around the bullseye. Wow, that was a good shot, Naruto-kun. Hinata quietly enthused before she copied him, the spread being a bit looser, but still very good. Seriously. You're better than I was before I left the academy, and Shuriken Jutsu was one of my best subjects. The brunette blinked in surprise. Hey, can I borrow a shuriken? Blinking, Naruto gave her one as she walked over to stand next to him. Her arm blurred and the shuriken was suddenly embedded in the middle of the bullseye. Ha, still got it. The ramen chef smirked as she absently wiggled her fingers. I practice every so often just so I don't lose my touch. A girl needs to know how to defend herself after all. But the restaurant has been so busy lately I haven't had much time, so I was worried that I'd lost my edge. Dang. You're awesome, Ayame-ne-chan. Naruto blinked in shock. Hey. And don't you forget it, mister. Ayame smirked, crossing her arms under her breasts proudly. Later on, as Naruto took up the first watch of the night outside of Ayame's room, Sakura, Ino and Hinata were sharing with her. He grimly thought of the trouble which might come tomorrow. The schedule was to arrive at Arakusa village by about midday, check the goods to see if everything was above board, then spend the rest of the day sealing the supplies into the storage scrolls, before starting the journey back to Konoha the day after. Were this a shinobi-only mission, they could have been there and back in just over a day, but as Ayame was only a civilian, even with active chakra coils, something he hadn't known about her before now and he'd never felt the need to observe, on her, they had to move at her pace. Whoever these bandits are, they'd better leave Ayame-ne-chan alone, he thought with a determined scowl. I won't let anything happen to her on my watch. The next day. On the road, Konohagakure patrol area. Ayame-san, when you were training at the academy, did you have anything in particular you wanted to specialize in when you became a kunoichi? Sakura asked curiously as she walked by their client. Naruto, who had resumed the same position with Asuma as yesterday, perked up a bit at the question, more than a bit curious about the side of his surrogate sister he'd never known about before. Well, I was still pretty young back then, but I'd always liked the idea of becoming a rear-line support kunoichi. The ramen waitress replied with a thoughtful expression. You know, shuriken jutsu, iriojutsu, trap making, that kind of thing. I was never the best in most of our combat classes outside shuriken jutsu. I didn't have the natural control or imagination you need to get really good with genjutsu outside of the basics, and I was never really aggressive or physically minded enough to excel at taijutsu either. I was pretty good in ninjutsu, but never had enough chakra to think about becoming any kind of ninjutsu expert. What about weapons outside of shuriken? Naruto asked curiously. Never really tried them. Even back then, they didn't start as training with anything beyond practice shuriken or training kunai until after I left, and advanced weaponry never really caught my attention. Ayame responded with a shake of her head. If they had, I might have gone with something like you use, Naruto-kun. A Tanto or a Kodachi or something like that might have fit me well enough, but like I said, it never really caught my interest. Though my Chunin sensei did say that an Akamichi Ryori nin cooking ninja had taken an interest in me thanks to my experience in my dad's shop. Wait, really? Ino jerked around sharply in shock, suddenly breaking her conversation with Kurenai sensei. Wow, that's actually kinda impressive. The Akamichi are really protective of their Ryori nin arts and don't take a lot of apprentices outside their own clan. Even my clan and the Nara rarely get offered a chance to learn any of them, and our clans have been allied with the Akamichi for over a century. Someone must have thought you had a real talent for it. Huh, Ayame blinked in surprise. I never knew that. Ryori nin are pretty rare, the Akamichi are the only clan in Konoha that produces any number of them and only a small portion of the clan practices those arts. Asuma offered. But they're also one of the best support corps you can have for long-term missions. A good one can turn even the worst field rations into something tasty and nutritious enough to keep morale high and everyone fighting fit, and the best ones can even produce food that can bolster a ninja fighting power or healing after they eat some. It's honestly a shame you didn't get a chance to follow through on that training Ichiraku-san, the village could always use another good supporter. Didn't really have a choice, like I said Ka-san had just died and Oyaji really needed me. The brunette offered with a shrug and a rueful smile. Too late to pout about it now, anyway. The best time to learn ninja-related stuff is when you're a kid and your chakra network and coils are still malleable and developing. Even if I re-enlisted it and that apprenticeship was still open, it'd take me ages just to reach genin level. That's the sad truth of it, but Hokage-sama has been playing with the idea of creating something akin to a civilian auxiliary program. It will mostly be aimed at those who had attended the academy but dropped out for some reason, offering it as a way to help keep their old skills sharp in case of an emergency and maybe even learn one or two new ones. The Jonin informed her with a bit of a grin. Just thought it might be something you'd be interested in looking into. Ayame shrugged again, though she did look a bit intrigued. Oyaji has been meaning to hire in some more staff at the stall so we can have a bit more time for ourselves. If he does, and this auxiliary thing pans out, it certainly sounds like something that might be interesting. The two genin teams and their client had set out early that morning from the inn where they'd spent the previous night and were currently making fairly good progress. With any luck they should arrive at the Shukuba where Ayame's ingredients were being delivered by early this afternoon. So far, the mission had been a cakewalk, with the only bit of excitement being a sudden attack from a chakra mutation. The mutation, which had resembled a large bull that snorted actual smoke and had horns made of burning coals, had simply charged out of the surrounding woods, bellowing like it had gone completely mad and charged directly toward their group. Asuma and Kurenai had stood back and let their students handle it, since the bull didn't seem too dangerous. Ino and Sakura had both quickly moved, each grabbing one of Ayame's arms and leaping backwards to get their client out of danger while Naruto had burst forward, unleashing a small horde of rock clones that had swarmed the beast and practically buried it under an avalanche of boulders and stone spears. Hinata and Choji had quickly recovered their wits and moved to assist, while Shikamaru stayed back to help the girls defend their client. Their help, however, wasn't needed. The bull hadn't lasted past the first barrage. Naruto himself had been quite pleased with the event that the system had called a wandering encounter, since it had not only earned him enough experience to finally get his level up to level 19, but had also scored him a chakra core from the bull, which he could either sell for a nice pocketful of ryo or have a smith forge into a new weapon. Also, he'd learned something new about his gamer ability. Its reality warping powers apparently made everyone else in the area think he'd used one of his remaining clones to dig the core out the dead chakra mutation, which was a bit gross but useful for keeping his power a secret for now. He'd also earned one other reward and a fair bit of cash from defeating the Burning Bull. A scroll on Kyakujutsu. Kyakujutsu, LV1, 0%. The art of gunpowder is a form of bukijutsu that has fallen out of favor since the spread of exploding tags created using fuinjutsu. While somewhat redundant with the advent of the more easily mass-produced and transported explosive tags, this art can still be quite devastatingly effective in the proper hands, particularly since modern ninja are now trained to look more for hidden fuinjutsu tags than more conventional explosives. As such, it is still practiced among those who specialize in acts of sabotage and laying traps, and advanced users can be among the most devastating demolitions experts in the world. The most common product of Kyakujutsu still utilized in the modern era is the humble smoke bomb. Unlike most forms of bukijutsu, which can be used readily in the field as long as the user is carrying the needed weapon or tool, Kyakujutsu requires time, ingredients, and planning to properly prepare multiple single-use explosive in advance and then use them appropriately. By acquiring this art, Several items, skills, and quests have been unlocked that were previously unavailable. Kyakujutsu recipe unlocked. Kemuridama, smoke bomb. Kyakujutsu recipe unlocked. Doku Kemuridama, poison smoke bomb. Kyakujutsu recipe unlocked. Mahi Kemuridama, paralysis smoke bomb. Kyakujutsu recipe unlocked. Barain Kemuridama, blinding smoke bomb. Reduces material waste during Kyakujutsu item creation by 1%. Reduces chance of a fumble incident during Kyakujutsu item creation by 1%. Looking through the ingredients that he'd need to make use of this new skill, Naruto's grin was soon practically splitting his face at how easily he could find most of them. He could have easily found everything on the lists within a block or two of his old apartment complex. Heck, he was pretty sure he could easily pick up everything he'd need at the upcoming Shukuba. Everything from the mortar and pestle, beakers, and other supplies to the small list of chemical ingredients should all be readily available at a decent-sized trading post. Now, some might be confused as to why Naruto, who had a passion for ninjutsu, and big, flashy ninjutsu in particular, would be so interested in something as relatively simplistic as Kyakujutsu. What those people seem to have forgotten was that Naruto was also a serial prankster with a talent for setting traps for his victims to walk into. Thus, this new form of jutsu actually fit into his existing skill set quite nicely. Less than an hour later, the two teams and their clients spotted a large wooden tower in the distance, with a large set heavy wooden walls coming into view a few moments later. Yup, that's Arakusa. Asuma confirmed with a nod. If memory serves, the Shukuba should be located on the opposite side of the village, with the tower acting as the home base for whatever squad of the Boundary Patrol Corps currently stationed here. Isn't that a bit too obvious a place for ninja to be stationed? Choji asked, sounding a bit confused. Kurenai gave her student an approving smile. A good observation, Choji, and normally you'd be right. The guard tower does make itself an obvious target for any attacking force, but that is intentional in this case. The Boundary Patrol Corps has three main objectives: to detect any dangers or hostile forces within Konoha territory, to alert Konohagakure should any serious threat make itself known within our borders, and to protect the civilians that are living within the village's territory. The guard tower not only allows them an excellent view of the surroundings for any sign of trouble, but it will also draw the attention of any would-be attackers and give the civilians a better chance to either evacuate or hunker down while they focus their attention there. If nothing else, the strongest attackers will focus on the Konoha shinobi there, which will give the local guards a better chance against the small fry. Troublesome. Not like it matters, there hasn't been an attack on a guard tower in close to a decade now. Shikamaru muttered. The Patrol Corps has a number of trackers and sensors that specialize in hunting down bandit groups and nuke nin before they can dig in and amass enough forces to actually threaten the towers and the trading posts and villages they're located in. Or at least that's what my old man always says. Jonin Commander Shikaku is right about that. Asuma agreed with a proud nod. Of course, that only applies to areas under the Konoha Patrol umbrella. I know a lot of the trade routes in Hino Kuni can't go more than a month without attracting some ambitious group of bandits or nuke nin. Even the capital gets attacked by nuke nin every once in a while. Isn't that kinda suicidally stupid? Sakura couldn't help but voice her disbelief. You have to understand the capital is basically a city like any other, Sakura. Yeah, the guard's a bit larger, but they're still spread out across a very big place. Add to that, the daimyo's samurai are primarily concerned with the Kakikuku Fire Chrysanthemum Palace, and the surrounding governmental district, and the Guardian Shinobi 12 are solely responsible for protecting daimyo, his immediate family, and his interests. The former Guardian member informed his Pinkett student. As long as they're sure to stay a good distance away from those places, then a moderately competent group of nuke nin can, and have, infiltrate the capital in order to steal something of value. Sometimes they even manage to escape with their prize, though that hasn't happened in, close to 5 years ago now. Asuma should know, he was a member of the 12 when that particular incident occurred. Kurenai pointed out. Don't remind me. The bearded Jonin let out a huff and a mildly dramatic shudder. A group of nuke nin snuck in and robbed a jewelry merchant that was popular with the nobility and managed to get away. The palace was practically flooded with squawking nobles all demanding that the daimyo send out the full force of the 12 out in order to bring the rapscallions who dared disturb the peace of the capital to justice, or some other such ruckus. Ah, if I never have to deal with that much shrieking and howling again, it will be too soon. What happened? Hinata asked softly. The daimyo refused to send out his personal guard, but did get in contact with Konoha and had Oyaji send out some of his best to deal with it. Guy and Kakashi got sent out and managed to hunt the group down in just 4 days, 2 of it was spent traveling. Asuma offered with a smirk. They even managed to take the entire band of Nuke Nin in alive so the fire daimyo could make a big show of having them tried and punished before his courts. As they'd talked, the group had made it to just outside the outer wall of the village, particularly the wide open gates that lead to the main road. On either side of the gate was a pair of ashigaru, conscripted soldiery that were the only non-ninja force that the daimyo allowed to operate under Konoha's umbrella of control. As Asuma-sensei had explained it, it was a gesture of trust from the fire daimyo to the Hokage since it pretty much indicated that the area was exclusively under his and his shinobi's control. The only person who had to show their traveling papers to the guards was Ayame. The Hittite that the shinobi wore were sufficient identification while they were still under Konoha's umbrella. No one with any sense of self-preservation would try and impersonate a Konoha shinobi so close to their home village. Well, this is where we part ways for the moment, Kurenai stated, nodding toward the guard tower as her team gathered behind her. We'll reconvene at that cafe over there in a couple of hours. Shikamaru and Choji both waved goodbye as they left, albeit barely raising his arm in Shikamaru's case, while Hinata bobbed a quick bow and offered a shy, blushing smile at Naruto before turning to quickly follow her sensei. Again, Sakura and Ino had to fight down a sudden stab of irritation for some reason. They still had no clue why the sight of the timid and quiet Hyuga talking to Naruto would irk them so much. Being the client and local expert, Ayame quickly led them to the Shukuba, which, as Asuma had said, was located near the main gates on the opposite side of the village. While they moved, Naruto quickly used the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu to summon up a dozen clones before sending them out to scour the local market and shops to see if there was anything interesting available for sale. You really do love spamming that jutsu, don't you? Sakura observed dryly. Don't even try and tell me that you wouldn't do the same if you could use it like I can, Sakura-chan. The blonde shot back with a grin, making the girl flush to match her hair before looking away with a huff. Ah, I still can't believe you can just pop out a dozen shadow clones like it was nothing. That's a Jonin rank technique. Ino groaned in exasperation. Just making one of them takes close to 5 times the amount chakra I can use at once, and you just pop them out like you don't even notice. My chakra pools are way bigger than most people, and I regenerate it a hell of a lot faster too. Naruto shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. I've already regained most of the chakra I burned through to create those clones. Already. The Yamanaka heiress gawped at him for a moment. Gods and spirits, Naruto, just what the hell are you? You have to have some crazy body type Kekai Genkai or something to generate that much chakra and chakra regeneration. You're not too far off there, Ino. Though, no one was ever able to determine if the Uzumaki clan's bloodline of longevity was an actual Kekai Genkai. Asuma offered with an amused huff. Every member of that clan had impossibly powerful life forces and extremely large chakra reserves, though I think our resident Uzumaki would be considered a particularly strong case even then. There's a reason that they were called the Clan of Eternal Life. Even the members that never trained to become shinobi could live to be over 100 if no outside forces intervened. Some members developing odd talents, like Naruto's equally insane regeneration speed, wasn't all that unheard of either. If I remember right, some members of the clan could even heal people just by sharing their chakra with them. That is such an unfair ability. Ino muttered, momentarily dumbstruck by the unfairness of it all. It does come with quite a few downsides. The Uzumaki almost never had any genjutsu users worth the name. Even with a lifetime of training, even the most talented Uzumaki couldn't generate the small, tightly controlled bursts of chakra needed to use genjutsu. Asuma offered. Any form of jutsu that requires finer than average chakra control, like the Bunshin no Jutsu, is difficult for them, so most tend to specialize in brute force techniques. There's even a rumor that the Nadaime created the Kage Bunshin as a wedding gift for the Uzumaki clan when his brother married Uzumaki Mito so they could have a clone jutsu perfectly suited for them. Wait, so you're saying that Naruto-kun should have been taught that technique from the very beginning rather than struggling with the normal Bunshin for so long? Ayame asked with a frown, indignant on Naruto's behalf. What the hell? Blamed Toji Mizuki, that asshat had pretty much been trying to sabotage me from day fucking one. The last Uzumaki of Konoha grumbled out. Bastard, hope he's having a fun time in the hot box. The hot box was a rather popular nickname for the Konoha Strict Correctional Facility, since it was located in a mostly dormant volcano. Their conversation came to a halt as they reached the Shukuba, a large warehouse-like building with a small office attached at the front. Walking up to the main desk at the front, Ayame gave her information and asked if her order had arrived yet. Ah, Ichiraku Ayame-sama. I'm sorry to say, but the convoy with your order hasn't arrived yet. The woman behind the counter, a stern-faced middle-aged woman dressed in a professional kimono, said after a moment of searching through her records. It was expected a few hours ago, but it has yet to arrive. No way. The ramen waitress groaned in annoyed dismay. You have our most sincere apologies for this. This is most unlike Caravan Master Shusuke. The woman offered with a bow and a nervous frown. He is usually one of the most dependable overseers we have contracted and has not failed to bring in a caravan on time for nearly 2 decades. If you can tell me where you'll be staying, we will have a runner sent to inform you the moment the caravan arrives. Ha, can't be helped, I guess. Ayame muttered under her breath before offering the woman a small bow. Thank you, ma'am. I'll be either at the cafe called Isukya or at the local inn for most of the day. The woman nodded and quickly jotted down a quick note onto a nearby sheet of paper. As the group left and started to make their way back to the cafe they'd agreed to meet teammate at, Asuma gave Ayame a curious glance. Does what she said match with what you know about this place, Ichiraku-san? It does. Oyaji has been using the same trading company since I was a little girl to get the best ingredients we can find from Nano-kuni, and their caravans are almost never late. And even if they have been late, never by more than an hour or two. Ayame answered, nibbling worriedly on her lower lip. I've been making these runs every other month for the past 2 or 3 years now and I can count the number of times the caravan has been late on one hand and still have most of my fingers left. The Jonin nodded, mouth turning down into a slight frown. That's certainly a bad sign. Given what we've heard, the length of time that has elapsed since they were supposed to arrive, and the fact they haven't sent messenger out ahead to warn the Shukuba about the delay, I'd say that they've likely been jumped by bandits. The best place for an attack like that would be right at the boundary line right at the edge of Konoha's umbrella. That would be about a half hour from here by wagon or maybe 10 minutes by shinobi travel. I'd like to look into it, but I can't take my team outside of the umbrella, they simply aren't ready for C-rank level action just yet. Naruto was frowning as well, this certainly wasn't going like he had been expecting. Had he just been paranoid earlier? No, he couldn't let his guard down yet. The fact that bandits had likely attacked the caravan meant that they were likely still in the area, and might still be hunting for more prey. Has Tsuki-asan got enough ingredients to last until you can get another order in? Naruto asked as they reached the cafe. Nope. Unfortunately, we'd have to buy enough to hold us over from the local farms, and they charge an arm and a leg. Ayame explained with a shake of her head. The Akamichi clan has a bunch of long-standing contracts to buy up all the best produce directly from the local farms, so the merchants always charge a premium for any fresh, high-quality produce that they don't snap up. Makes it cheaper for restaurants like ours to just import what we need. I'll have to mention that to the old man, price gouging like that amongst Konoha's citizenry is something he'd frown on. Asuma stated with a frown. They call it a clan price, since they're aiming to sell to the more prominent ninja clans. Ayame shrugged. All of the merchants that deal in foodstuffs back home are grouped into a block that supports it. Funny thing about blocks, they tend to break when you hit them hard enough. Asuma offered with a bit of a dark grin. Anyway, let's get something to eat and drink while we wait for Kurenai and her team to show up. My treat. Kurenai and her team arrived a bit less than an hour later, finding Team 10 and Ayame enjoying a nice little party amongst themselves which the other team was quickly invited into. In between the eating and drinking, Team 8 informed Team 10 that they had indeed succeeded in their mission and the Hokage's message had been delivered, but there had been an unforeseen complication. 3 caravans were scheduled to arrive today and none of them have shown up yet. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the local detachment of the Patrol Corps are busy dealing with a mudslide that's threatening to swallow a farming community nearby. They barely have enough people left to keep up their normal patrols. Kurenai informed Asuma while their genin were distracted with each other. The patrol commander requested that I investigate, but I can't take my team outside the umbrella. Not only are they not ready for that kind of risk, but I'd be under a disciplinary review for taking them out before they've met the minimum thresholds for taking AC rank. And you'd be in just as much trouble if you left them behind on their own. Asuma agreed with a nod. If we combine our teams, we should have enough coverage for a full genin squadron, then you and I could head out, take care of this and be back within a day. We'll need to set up a proper chain of command before we head out though. If there's even a chance of an attack we can't risk the kids squabbling over what to do. Kurenai had been brought in on the risk of a possible attack on this mission by the Hokage, keeping the origin of the warning as classified for now, and she was clearly not happy with the idea of leaving her genin behind. Unfortunately, the fact that 3 caravans had suddenly gone missing while heading towards Konoha territory was a fairly big deal. Despite only being a chunin, the local boundary patrol commander had the authority to give orders to any Konoha shinobi in the area, even a higher-ranked jonin, so long as the orders were germane to his duty of ensuring the security of Konoha's territory. That he was being polite and tactful enough to request their assistance rather than simply ordering it was honestly more a show of respect and courtesy than actually giving them a choice. Kurenai nodded, agreeing with Asuma's logic. If there was even a minor risk of the relay station itself coming under attack, then they couldn't risk their genin getting hurt due to infighting in the chaos. No offense to Shikamaru, but I don't think he'd welcome being forced to act as genin commander in this kind of situation. There's a chance he wouldn't take it seriously enough or just foist all the responsibility onto someone else. The bearded jonin offered, thinking aloud. And neither Choji and Hinata really have the assertiveness needed to take command just yet. I can't really argue with that, but Ino and Sakura aren't exactly good candidates either. They're both a bit too assertive to trust with this kind of authority. The Genjutsu mistress countered, before pausing as she realized just who was left. Wait, are you thinking of putting Naruto in command? He's actually matured quite a bit since the academy, Kurenai. Asuma replied with a bit of a proud grin. He's gotten pretty good at keeping Ino and Sakura in line as it is. Hinata's crush should ensure she listens to him, and Shikamaru and Choji will go along with it since they're too lazy and easygoing, respectively, to raise a ruckus on their own. Still a bit dubious at the idea that Konoha's resident prankster king was the most responsible genin available to them, Kurenai nonetheless acceded to her colleague's greater experience with the boy and nodded her consent. If you think he can be trusted. When do we head out? We can leave at first light tomorrow. We were planning on staying overnight anyway. The smoking guardian stated. That'll give the kids a chance to relax for the rest of the day and then we can inform them of what's happening over dinner. That'll let Naruto have a chance to get used to his temporary position and come up with a plan for if the worst happens. Kurenai agreed with the plan. She also began to mentally shuffle through her thoughts for anything she could tell her adoptive little sister's crush to help him prepare for his impending encounter with leadership. The next day. Outside Arakusa Inn, Arakusa Village. Naruto was reasonably pleased with the result of the previous day, the delay in the shipment and the looming threats aside. Thanks to his clones scouring the local shops and market he'd been able to buy everything that he needed to start using his new Kyakujutsu skill, and he'd even managed to find another mechanism for his trickster's coat at one of the stalls, one he was fairly sure he wouldn't have been able to notice if he hadn't acquired his newest skill the previous day. Mechanical Mini Kemiridama Launcher. Rare. General Ninja Tool for the Trickster's Gauntlet can be placed in any slot. A small mechanism designed to store up to a dozen miniature smoke bombs, as well as use a small, chakra-powered launcher to deploy them at mid-range. While in no ways an offensive weapon, this highly concealable tool concealed within the Trickster's coat can allow a clever ninja a means to suddenly break combat, create a distraction, or provide cover in a pinch. As a result of acquiring this ninja tool while also possessing the Kyakujutsu skill, recipes for miniaturized versions of all smoke bomb type items have automatically been unlocked. Any new recipe for smoke bomb type explosives that are acquired will automatically generate a miniaturized recipe as well. Magazine size 12. He'd gleefully snapped his newest toy into the third slot on his coat. He'd also found a box containing a bit less than 100 of the miniature smoke bombs that it used as ammo. Sure, nearly a quarter of them had been water damaged, cracked, or otherwise rendered useless due to bad storage. They and the mechanism had apparently belonged to a retired shinobi and had been sold off as a lot after his death, with the buyer having no idea what he'd bought, and they were all standard smoke bombs, but that still meant he had 76 smoke bombs ready to use, and he could always make more now. Then there was the issue where he'd apparently been shoehorned into acting as the genin commander, a position that hadn't seen regular use since the end of the last Great Ninja War, for their temporarily combined genin squadrons since Asuma and Kurenai had been asked to investigate the caravans that had suddenly disappeared, including the one that had been carrying Ayame's shipment. That little surprise had been enough to update the quest for the love of ramen, adding an additional object and completely rewriting the second objective and the rewards. Quest updated. For the love of ramen, Ichiraku Ayame has hired your genin team to escort her to the village of Arakusa, a small relay station and farming community located on the very edge of Konoha's outer patrol perimeter, in order to pick up a delivery of ingredients from Nanokuni. Arakusa, while small, is an important rest point for many caravans heading into and out of Konoha, making it a tempting target for the likes of bandits and Nuke Nin. Quest Objective 1. Escort Ichiraku Ayame to the Shukuba post station in the village of Arakusa. Complete. Quest Objective 2. Take command of teams 10 and 8 in the absence of the Jonin Sensei and protect Ichiraku Ayame should Nuke Nin or bandits attack Arakusa village. Duration. 1 day. In progress. Quest Objective 3. Escort Ichiraku Ayame back to Konohagakure, taking care to protect the produce as well. Quest Failure. Death of Ichiraku Ayame. Death of yourself. Death and or enslavement of your fellow genin. Destruction of Ichiraku Ayame's ordered produce. Quest Reward 1. Plus 1000 XP. Plus 500 reputation with Ichiraku Ayame deferred until quest completion. Quest Reward 2. Plus 1500 XP. Plus 15000 Ryo. Leadership, skill, random, trickster's coat device. Quest Reward 3. Plus 10,000 Express, plus 10000 Ryo, honored reputation with Ichiraku Chuki, error. Reputation already maxed, honored reputation with Ichiraku Ayame, error. Reputation already maxed. The updated rewards made Naruto's paranoia ring alarm bells yet again. Triple the experience, a shit ton of Ryo, a skill that looked really useful and a fourth gadget for his coat. Yeah, the bandits / Nuke Nin were definitely going to attack today, almost for certain. It had changed last night, after he and the two Jonin had spent almost 2 hours going over what-if scenarios and contingency plans. He'd told Asuma Sensei as soon as he could, and the man looked deeply troubled by the revelation. In the end, the senior ninja had ordered Naruto to place protecting the lives of his teammates, Ayame, and himself above the rest of the garrison and even the other civilians. If a large group of Nuke Nin or bandits attacked the outpost, they were to evacuate and hide in the countryside outside the village until Asuma and Kurenai returned. That obviously hadn't sat well with Naruto, but he could still see his Jonin sensei's point. Any force of bandits and or ninja that was strong enough to attack a fortified village like Arakusa would be way too much for a group of 6 fresh genin to handle. Even Naruto, with all the enhancements that the gamer granted him, would be hard-pressed to do more than help hold off a force like that, even with the rest of the garrison helping. With that in mind, the only real choice was to prioritize the life of himself and his comrades. The patrol corps were all duty-bound to defend the village, but they were still genin and thus were instead obligated to follow their sensei's orders. Looking at his temporarily squad mates, he had been honestly surprised that Sakura and Ino had accepted his temporarily promotion so easily, neither arguing when he'd been put in charge. Choji and Hinata had, likewise, offered no complaints. Shikamaru had been the only voice of dissent and his only argument, that, He was troublesome, whatever that meant, had earned him a slap to the back of the head from Kurenai. Ayame had just congratulated him on his field promotion and had ruffled his hair, which he had allowed with only minimal protesting. Alright. So, we're going to be spending today as close to the southwestern corner of the village as we can. Naruto addressed his squad firmly. Asuma and Kurenai had left only a few minutes ago, so it was time for him to get things organized and moving. Why there? Ino blinked at the sudden announcement. Despite having been roused from her bed at an ungodly hour, to use her own words, the blonde still looked as remarkably well put together as ever. Naruto vaguely wondered why he had even noticed that. Because Asuma-sensei and Kurenai-sensei had intel that indicates that this village may come under attack today. The Uzumaki stated softly, keeping an eye out to make sure no one was close enough to overhear him. They've already warned the patrol commander about it, so the garrison should be on alert, but they also gave me strict orders that, should the attack occur, I am to evac all of us and Ayame out of the village. Since we've all got the ability to climb walls thanks to the tree climbing exercise, we should be able to get over the walls pretty quick if the worst happens, don't you think? I can follow most of that, but why the southwest corner specifically? Shikamaru asked, giving Naruto a tired look. Because the bandits, Nuke Nin, or whatever are likely going to be striking from outside the Konoha umbrella. The blonde Jinchuriki stated simply. Our sensei are headed due south to investigate the trade route, so they'll catch any attack that comes from that general direction. If the enemy's smart enough to try and avoid the two Jonin, who won't be actively working to conceal their chakra, then they'll likely circle around and try and attack us from the east or northeast. Good point. The ponytailed Nara agreed with a sigh. Alright, let's get moving then. The sooner we get there, the sooner I can find a nice place to cloud watch. So long as you're ready to fight and move if anything happens, knock yourself out Shikamaru. Naruto agreed. Alright everyone, bodyguard formation 5. Ayame hitched an eyebrow as Hinata, Sakura, and Ino arrayed themselves into a triangle around her, before Naruto, Choji and Shikamaru formed larger, inverted triangle around them. Formation 5 was a guard formation designed to allow for a loose and quick reaction to any threat to a single target, allowing for multiple layers of defense. Using it on a simple civilian girl like her was fairly odd. It was usually reserved for high-value clients, but if it made Naruto feel better she wasn't going to protest about it. They had barely reached a small, grassy patch of land on Arakusa's southwestern corner when the enemy attacked. 1 minute they were looking for a comfortable spot to gather up and just wait out the day, and the next there was an enormous explosion coming from the eastern walls. Hinata, what's happening? Naruto quickly asked. Byakugan. White Eye. The Hyuga heiress whispered, forming a hand sign as she activated her clan's dojutsu. A second later, veins began to bulge around her eyes as her already pale lavender eyes paled considerably. With a moment's focus, she directed her now amplified sight toward where the explosions had originated and where the sounds of battle were already starting to echo from. There are 22 attackers. Most of them seem to be roughly as strong as we are, Genin level, but I can see 4 that are looked to be at least Chunin level and their apparent leader is Jonin level, a fairly weak Jonin compared to Asuma-sensei or Kurenai-sensei, but still a Jonin. Right, we need to get out of here. Protecting our client comes first. Naruto decided. If it wasn't for the Jonin, he might have considered going against orders to help protect the village and the populace, but he wasn't stupid enough to risk his friends and squad mates against a Jonin. Over the wall and out, then head straight for the tree line. Then we can find somewhere to bunker down until our sensei get back. Got it. Getting nothing but nods from his squad, Naruto quickly formed the clone hand sign. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. In a puff of smoke, 6 copies of himself suddenly appeared. Henjin go. He ordered aloud. Getting grim nods in return, the 6 duplicates all used the Henj no Jutsu to transform into nondescript Chunin that Naruto had seen around Konoha and quickly leapt back towards the battle. They'll do what they can to help, but they'll focus on keeping anyone from moving in our direction for as long as possible. He stated defensively as the others stared at him in surprise. Now let's get gone, damn it. Picking up Ayame in a princess carry, which made her let out a very Hinata-ish eep. In surprise, Naruto quickly ran up the wooden palisade, swiftly followed by his team and teammate. As they quickly dropped down to the grass on the opposite side, Naruto twitched as two of his clones were suddenly destroyed by a large man wielding what had to be the oddest-looking sword that he had ever seen. Fortunately, his clones shared all of the abilities he had, including his gamer vision, so he now knew just who he was dealing with. Hoshigaki Chikua LV-35. Member of the Seven Shadow Swordsmen of the Mist, leader of Karehagakure. Karehagakure. The village hidden among the dead leaves. The Jinchuriki blinked in shock, even as he ran for the treeline. That has to be some kind of jab at Konoha. Bastards. Technically, Kareha meant dried out leaves if you took it literally, but it was mostly understood to mean just dead leaves, in general. For a group of Nuke Nin to use it as part of their name, it either implied that the majority of them were Konoha Nuke Nin or that they intended to turn Konohagakure into a dried out husk of its former self. Either way, it was a direct insult to the village. One of my clones caught sight of the Jonin level leader before it was dispelled. They had a slashed out Karehagakure headband. Naruto called to the squad at large. He claimed to be Hoshigaki Chikua, leader of Karehagakure. Those names mean anything to anyone. Troublesome. Shikamaru groaned out. The first name itself doesn't ring any bells, but Oyaji has mentioned the Hoshigaki clan before. They're apparently a clan of battle maniacs from Kiri that tend to produce really dangerous shinobi. Yeah, that makes sense. Guy boasted about being a member of the Seven Shadow Swordsmen of the Mist, before he chopped my clone in half. Naruto elaborated. Any idea what that is? Asuma-sensei and Tenten have both mentioned the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist before, but neither of them said anything about shadows. Never heard of it. The Nara heir shook his head, looking perturbed. What about you, Sakura? You ever come across that name in your reading? The Pinkett Kunoichi frowned as she racked her mind, but shook her head as they finally reached the treeline. No, nothing about any shadow swordsman, but I do remember reading about Kiri's Seven Shadow Swords of the Mist. They were apparently the final prototypes for the swords that would become the signature weapons of the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist. They're all supposed to be powerful, but they also all have some kind of major flaw that caused them to be discarded so the final swords could be made. There were a few mentions of them being used during the Second Great Shinobi War. Well, this Hoshigaki guy did have a sword that was longer than he was tall. It kinda looked like a filleted fish. Naruto grunted, focusing on the memories he got from his clones. Had to be at least 6 feet long, looked like a metal rod attached to a sword handle without a tsuba, with 6 large blades that looked kinda like shark teeth coming out of either side. Sorry, no clue. Sakura said with a shake of her head. The book I read didn't have any real information on the shadow swords themselves, it was mostly about the history of the Seven Swords and the Seven Swordsmen. How long are we gonna keep running? Ino asked, changing the subject. She was starting to look a bit winded. Until we find somewhere defensible where we can hunker down. Then we're going to trap the ever-loving hell out of it and wait. Naruto stated grimly. Once we're secure, I'll send out some more shadow clones to keep an eye out and warn Asuma-sensei and Kurenai-sensei about the attack. Goddamn broken clone jutsu. Ino grumbled good-naturedly. In short order, they'd found a small clearing and had started laying down traps all around it. Before they even started, Naruto had made 6 more Kage Bunshin and then sent them out after their Jonin-sensei to report the attack on Arakusa. He also had Hinata activate her Byakugan periodically to check and make sure that there weren't any enemies coming after them. That should do it. Sakura sighed out as she reclined against a nearby tree, already tired from having to set up so many traps. What the hell, Naruto? Why did you bring enough trapping supplies to trip up a Jonin with? This was supposed to just be a high D rank mission for crying out loud. Hey, you say that, but it certainly came in handy, didn't it, Sakura-chan? Naruto gave her a foxy grin. Sides, a good prankster is always prepared to pull off something big. Not like weight is even an issue when you've got plenty of storage scrolls. You do realize that most genin don't really have access to over a dozen storage scrolls, right? Shikamaru pointed out dryly, one eyebrow twitching in annoyed disbelief after having watched Naruto pull out at least a dozen scrolls from some hidden pockets in his jacket. Then most genin should really learn to make their own. It's a super useful skill to have. The Uzumaki replied smugly before turning to check on their client. How are you doing, Ayame-ne-chan? I'm fine, Naruto-kun. The ramen waitress replied from where she was sitting on the grass. A bit hungry, but nothing to be worried about for the moment. Naruto just reached into his jacket, actually his inventory, and pulled out yet another scroll, and causing Shikamaru's eyebrow to twitch some more before rolling it out on the ground. Pressing a single finger into the array, he fed a bit of his chakra into it. With a puff of smoke, a large selection of picnic foodstuffs, some still steaming hot, appeared atop a large blanket, making Choji gulp hungrily. I was planning on using this as a little treat for everyone on the way home. Oh, well done on completing our first out of the village mission, kinda thing for my team. He offered with an embarrassed shrug as everyone, Ayame included, stared at him with raised eyebrows. Hurry up and just dig in while it's still hot, damn it. Naturally, Choji needed no further prompting to dive in. After an impromptu lunch, Naruto started double-checking the traps set around the perimeter before suddenly wincing in pain as he was suddenly assaulted with the information as all of his remaining clones were destroyed in rapid succession. And not just the ones in the village, but also the 6 that he'd sent after their sensei as well. Fuck. Another group led by a Jonin was blocking the way that our sensei went. He quickly informed the rest of the group. They just wiped out the clones I sent that way and then pincered the last few I had left helping out in the village. 6 in total, 5 Chunin and a single Jonin, all Nuke Nin. What villages? Shikamaru asked. 3 from Kurigakure, 1 from Iwagakure, 1 from Kumogakure, and the Jonin was from Konoha. Naruto listed off. From what I overheard as they slaughtered my clones, looks like the Konoha Jonin was this group's leader before that Kurigakure guy came in, kicked her ass, and then took over. Or rather, Naruto knew that was what happened. Akazukan Sayuri LV-33. Former leader of Karehagakure, Nuke Nin of Konoha. A Kunoichi Nuke Nin, Naruto knew that they were actually comparatively rarer when compared to Shinobi Nuke Nin, with the added risks that being outlaw had for a Kunoichi, but there were more than a few of them out there. He just hadn't expected to come across one so early in his career. A Jonin-ranked Kunoichi Nuke Nin from Konoha? Shikamaru asked, closing his eyes and falling into his thinking pose for a moment as Naruto quickly listed off a general description of the Nuke Nin in question. Akazukan Sayuri. Formerly a Tokubetsu Jonin specialized in infiltration and assassinations. She was found guilty of taking unregistered assassination requests and torturing prisoners without authorization, but fled the village before she could be captured a couple years ago. Primary Kaden, secondary Doden, tertiary Raiden affinities. How the hell did you figure that out? Sakura boggled at him. Shikamaru sighed before shrugging. My old man let me skim through his copy of the bingo book a couple of times. Not like there was anything better to do when it was bucketing down the rain outside. So troublesome, so, what's the plan, Commander? The Nara asked, turning his attention to Naruto. We're cut off from any backup, and I wouldn't count on us being able to hide out here for long, not with 2 Jonin and nearly a dozen Chunin in play. There's a better than average chance at least one of them is some kind of tracker. Naruto bit his lip, before turning to Hinata. Hinata, check back in the direction of the village. Anything new in that direction? Nodding, the Hyuga once again activated her Kekai Genkai again and flinched. There's a 4-man team of Chunin heading our way from the village, and another group of 4 is coming our way from the southern road. Great, we can't outrun a bunch of Chunin, so it looks like we're going to have to fight. Naruto stated with a serious nod. Alright everyone, gather round. Time to make a quick game plan. With the South Road Nuke Nin. Egami Shizuku, formerly a Chunin Kunoichi of Kurigakure, silently scowled as she led her 3 assigned teammates towards the forests that edged on the Shukuba town their group was raiding. She was a tall woman, with blue-silver hair cropped in a tomboyishly short cut and dressed in the gray and dark blue camouflage trousers that were pretty much standard issue for Kiri Ninja, along with a black tight-fitting shirt under an equally tight dark blue vest that was lightly armored, as well as a pair of black ninja sandals. She wore her Hitai 8 around her waist as a belt, which had the long scratch through it that denoted her status as a Nuke Nin. Her eyes were bottle green and were currently narrowed in contempt. Her bastard of a leader had decided to be a fucking prick, as usual, and had sent her off on fucking cleanup duty, hunting a small squad of tree hugger genin that had apparently fled into the forest when the attack had started. And for a team of 4 experienced chunin, that is exactly what hunting down a half-dozen Academy fresh genin was, clean-up duty. Even if the little fucks had a number advantage, there was simply no way that the brats would be able to do any damage to her and her squad, let alone actually kill them. True, genin had managed to kill chunin in the past, but that usually only happened in one of 3 circumstances. 1. The chunin had gotten arrogant and toyed with their prey and left an opening that the genin managed to take advantage of. 2. The chunin was already injured or otherwise weakened from a previous fight, or 3. They were dealing with some type of crazy prodigy that was only a genin on paper. The third option was ruled out thanks to the fact that they had former Leaf Ninja in their numbers. None of the kids they'd seen coming in had matched up with the current batch of prodigies that the Leaf was boasting, the so-called last of the Uchiha clan, and some boy from the Hyuga clan that was apparently some kind of genius with the clan's fighting style. The second option was also out. All 4 of them had been on the rear lines of the fighting when the raid started, so they were all relatively fresh. Now she just needed to address the first issue. While she wouldn't actually care if most of the jackasses she was working with got themselves killed because of their own fucking stupidity, she wasn't going to let their stupidity put her at risk. She took a moment to glance back at the other 3 chunin assigned to her team, Sato Saizo, Akaguro Akihime, and Mizuchi Ryusui, formerly of Konoha, Kusa and Kurigakure respectively. All 3 of them were fairly standard bastards, with the same type of backstory she'd come to expect from Nuke Nin coming from their respective villages. Saizo was your typical power-hungry bully who overreached his ability to cover his own ass. Akihime hated her old village for how weak and cowardly they'd become since the last war and had a hate-on for Konoha in particular. Ryusui came from a minor clan with Kekkei Genkei and had fled when the Yondaime Mizukage had started his bloodline purges. She, on the other hand, had left for a very simple and straightforward reason. She hated being just another number on the village roster. She was antisocial by nature and absolutely loathed the whole, greater part of the whole, crap that the shinobi villages all tried to push onto their ninja in some way or another. She'd have much rather been born in the warring clans era, where you only had to watch out for you and yours. Damned Senju Hashirama and his stupid, peace-loving hippie crap. The man might have been some unknown breed of badass, even she couldn't discount all the legends that still circulated about the man, but she absolutely hated the original tree hugger and the will of fire that his village preached about like it was some kind of religion. Bah, that kind of mushy togetherness bullshit just bred a bunch of soft and pathetic ninja that had to rely on each other to get by. Oi, Egami-san, we're almost there. Saizo informed her in an undertone. He was one of the 2 censor-type ninja in Karehagakure, with the other being one of their current leader, Hoshigaki Chikua's, personal stooges. Saizo might be an ass, but he was still better than that particular bastard. Right. She spat out tersely. Listen up, we're doing this fast and clean. We go in, get the drop on the tree-hugging brats, and then get out and report back. No sadistic shit, no drawing things out, don't even bother trying to loot the little bastards, it's not like they'll be carrying anything of value. Understood. Sounds like my kind of plan. Ryusui agreed with a nod. Whatever. Akihime grunted. Fine. Saizo sighed out, which caused Egami to throw the man a disgusted look. She liked a good fight as much as the next Kiri shinobi, held the thrill of a good, hard fight was better than sex in her personal opinion, but Saizo was the kind of sadistic little fuck that got his rocks off bullying those weaker than him. If she remembered right, that was actually why he'd been forced to flee Konoha. The man had a penchant for picking fights with civilians just to humiliate and beat on them, only he went too far and ended up beating one to death in a bout of sadistic indulgence before getting caught with his pants down. Alright, let's move. The Kiri Nuke Nin ordered with a growl. Honestly, she'd stab someone for a drink right now. Why had she ever defected from Kiri again? Oh right, because Yagura was a goddamned crazy, genocidal fuckwit. The first sign that something was off was when they first entered the forest was the sheer number of fucking traps that were scattered throughout the place. Most were fairly basic, snares, whip snaps, and pitfalls mostly, mixed with the occasional swing log or kunai, shuriken launchers, but how the hell had a bunch of fucking genin managed to get this many set up in just under half an hour or so? Egami herself managed to avoid all them fairly easily, but she had to fight down a snort of amusement when Ryusui got hit right in the dick by a particularly small, low-flying log. And again when Saizo nearly fucked up his ankle in a shallow pit trap that had obviously been created with the Doton Wana technique. She finally lost her fight when Akihime was hoisted up into the air by her leg by one of the snares. Seriously, how had these chuckleheads managed to reach Chunin rank when they were absolute crap at spotting basic traps? The second thing that was starting to get her hairs to rise was the feeling that they were being watched. Any Chunin, especially when they came from a village that specialized in ambush tactics like Kurigakure, knew how to keep an eye on their surroundings and spot any signs of someone observing them. But despite this, Egami couldn't see any signs of whatever bastard was watching her team. No matter where and when she looked, there was nothing but forest, and more forest. Seriously, why the fuck did a place named Hino Kuni have so many goddamn trees? How the fuck are genin this good at stealth? Was her increasingly frustrated thought. They'd been scouting out the little Shukuba village for a week before the attack and there were no signs of other ninja nearby aside from the local garrison and the two genin teams that had arrived the day before. The Jonin had been drawn away by the distraction they had been preparing in advance, while the majority of the garrison was being torn apart by their boss and the rest of Kareheigakures, elites. That meant it had to be the fucking genin that were watching them somehow. But there was simply no freaking way that any freshly graduated, unblooded greenhorn could slip past the senses of 4 experienced Chunin-level shinobi, let alone an entire bushel of the brats. Egami point-blank refused to acknowledge that as a possibility. Not only was the very idea absolutely absurd, but it was also more than a bit terrifying. It brought up stories she'd heard about how a certain half-trained kid had just walked in and slaughtered his way through an entire graduating class back in Kurigakure, Momochi Zabuza. Egami viciously repressed the shiver that shot up her spine at the mere thought of that man and banished him from her mind. Even for a village like Kurigakure, which proudly bore the title of the Bloody Mist, that man had been some breed of monster, with a bloodlust that was simply inhuman. Honestly, it wasn't that much of a surprise, in hindsight at least, that he had quickly been selected to be the next wielder of the dreaded Kubikiribocho. That grim blade constantly repaired and strengthened itself by feeding on the blood that it shed. While its official title among the 7 swords was the Seversword, most people she knew had referred to it as the blood-drinking sword. Saizo, why are we having so much trouble finding these brats? She snarled after several more minutes, a couple dozen more traps, and 7 new minor injuries later. The man was shaking his head. I don't know. It's like they're just appearing and disappearing all over the place, and more of them keep popping up. And now there's so many that I'm having trouble telling which is which anymore. Egami quickly recalled that Saizo's current limit for accurately detecting and differentiating chakra sources was about 30 in a confined area, and that more than 50 was beyond his current abilities. How do 6 fucking genin suddenly turn into over 50 chakra sources in the middle of nowhere? She cursed aloud. Even most solid clones don't have a strong enough chakra signature that they can be mistaken for a normal person by a sensor. There is the Cage Bunshin. Akihime pointed out from where she was quickly wrapping up a shallow cut on her arm from a kunai trap. That's a fucking B-rank kinjutsu, and a major chakra hog from what I've heard. Do you honestly think some fresh punk could use that kind of technique? The formerly Kiri Kunoichi scoffed. There might be one. Uzumaki Naruto was supposed to be a part of the graduating class for this year. Saizo offered after a moment's thought, a scowl on his lips. What the? I thought the Uzumaki were wiped out decades ago. Egami turned on him, a frown on her lips. Even she had heard about the supposedly extinct Uzumaki clan, particularly since Kiri had ended up having to ally with 2 other members of the great shinobi nations to eventually wipe them off the map. Hell, her own grandfather had been one of the shinobi involved in the assault, and he'd barely managed to survive it with his life, if not his career as a shinobi, intact. The sight of the old man's leg, severed off it just below the hip by some kind of water ninjutsu, the same jutsu that had wiped out the rest of his team, had left quite an impact on her when she was just a child. At least one survivor managed to get to Konoha and had a brat, and the kid had always had a frankly insane amount of chakra. The censor ninja answered simply, not giving away the actual reason why he had such a massive amount of chakra. Low-ranking Kurigakure ninja tended have a rather deep-seated fear of Jinchuriki, and he knew that if either of his Kiri squad mates knew one was nearby, even an untrained one like Uzumaki, they'd likely run for the hills without hesitation. If the Jonin instructor he was assigned was even halfway competent and managed to get him permission to learn the Kage Bunshin, we could be dealing with a small army of clones right now. Though, from everything I'd heard about the kid, his overall skill level was supposed to be rather pathetic. Bottom of his class. He might be able to overwhelm one as if his clones suddenly rushed in all at once, but not all four of us. The only question is, why can't I sense his chakra? It used to be that the kid was like a fucking beacon in the night to any nearby sensor. He's an Uzumaki. No matter the kid's skill level is, that clan practically had sealing ink mixed with their blood. Again, a half-competent teacher would have given him a book on the stuff or just equipped the kid with a concealment seal so he wouldn't be such an easy target. Akihime pointed out with a frown, given that Konoha and Uzushiogakure had been allies since they'd both been founded, it wasn't surprising that a former Kusagakure ninja like her knew about the clan as well. Or he could have been taught a jutsu to do the same, those are simple enough to learn and even Kage make use of them. Fuck. Egami took a moment to consider this before shaking her head. Alright, new plan, we're moving around to link up with the team from the distraction that we saw heading towards the forest from the other road. Once we do, we'll start tearing this fucking forest apart until there is nowhere left for these brats to hide. That might make things a bit rougher going forward. The Leaf Village tends have very unappreciative views when it comes to random acts of deforestation in their territory. Saizo pointed out cautiously. Most of the forests around the Leaf Village were supposed to have been grown by one of the Shidaime Hokage's own jutsu back in the founding days, so a lot of the older set tend to be rather protective of them. We just light this place up and it's going to piss off a lot of the higher-ups, particularly the Hokage and the Elder Council. As Egami started to open her mouth to deliver a rather scathing retort, she suddenly paused as she noticed something off. Where the fuck is Ryusui? Akihime and Saizo both blinked in surprise at the sudden question before glancing around in shock as they realized that the fourth member of their team was gone. There wasn't a single sign of him visible. Don't tell me that these crazy brats actually managed to kill him and grab the body without us even noticing. Akihime hissed out, a kunai appearing in her hand as she glanced around wildly in disbelief, a trace of actual fear in her voice. Don't be a fucking moron. They're just goddamn genin. Fresh. Green. Genin. Egami snapped back, using anger to mask her own fear as she fell into a more ready stance. Saizo, what the hell happened? How the hell did you miss someone getting close enough to grab Ryusui? Or did he just fucking wander off and you didn't bother to tell us? Neither. The man protested, honestly looking more dumbstruck than anything. None of the chakra sources have moved anywhere close to us, not since we entered the forest. And those were the idiots that we left behind on the road. And Ryusui didn't leave, he just vanished. He was standing there one moment and then he was just gone. I can't even tell when it happened. That put Egami right on the back foot. Kage Bunshin were perfect replicas of their creators, meaning that they had chakra networks of their own, which was why they were able to register as human to sensor nin. However, other forms of clones registered very differently to a sensor's perceptions. Certain clones like Bakuretsu Bunshin, explosive clones, or Raiden Bunshin, lightning-style clones, were packed with enough chakra that they showed up brighter and were far more easily detected and differentiated. Others, like the Academy's Bunshin Jutsu, were so weak that they were easy to distinguish as non-human but harder to detect from a distance. However, some clones, primarily those formed from some natural element that was molded and shaped into a human shape through an injection of chakra, could actually blend into their surroundings enough to go unnoticed since they tended to blend with the ambient chakra around them. Sure, a competent sensor might be able to notice and distinguish them, but Egami did not have much faith in Saizo's competence at the moment. The only issue was that most of that variety of clone jutsu had some sort of flaw or limitation. The Tsujoki Bunshin and Mizu Bunshin, for example, both had range limitations, with the clones unable to leave a set perimeter of their creator without dispersing into water vapor or collapsing back into water. Moku Bunshin was a ninja art that had died with the Shidaime Hokage, praise to the seas for that. Being ambushed by a bunch of those in a forest would probably be an utter nightmare. the Doro Bunshin no Jutsu, Mud Clone Technique, and Iwa Bunshin. Just as that thought started to percolate in her head, a pair of hands shot out of the ground to grab onto her ankles. Doten. Shinju Zanshu no Jutsu. With a startled yell, Egami was instantly dragged up to her chin in the ground, with the same happening nearly simultaneously to her two teammates. She then choked as a blade entered her heart from behind and her vision started to grow dim. The last thing that she managed to see was multiple copies of a single yellow-haired boy wearing dark blue leather armor emerging from the ground via a jutsu. A glimmer of light seemed to catch her dying mind's attention, letting her focus on the polished metal armor that covered one of the suit's shoulders. There, proudly engraved on the surface, was the distinctive spiral of the Uzumaki clan and Uzushiogakure. Huh, an Uzumaki, Saizo, was right, damned idiot, should have. Her last thoughts trailed off as Egami Shizuku, Nuke Nin of Kurigakure, breathed no more. Back with Naruto and the gang. My clones just finished off the team that came from the village. Naruto reported with a grim grin. While he didn't yet have the chakra needed to create an entire army of Kage Bunshin at once, he did have the reserves needed to make a good-sized number of them, and they in turn had more than enough chakra to form a large platoon of Iwa Bunshin to move around and surround the dumbass Nuke Nin who had been stupid enough to just traipse through the forest as if the place was their own backyard. After that, all it had taken was a few well-timed executions of the Doten, Dochu Igyo, and Doten, Shinju Zanshu no Jutsu, and the entire squad was down. The cocky idiots hadn't even noticed that one of their own had died while they were busy talking. And as a result, you have slain Mizuchi Ryusui. You receive 1900 Express. You have slain Akaguro Akihime. You receive 2000 EXP. You have slain Sato Saizo. You receive 1700 Express. You have slain Egami Shizuku. You receive 2200 Express. Looting has been deferred. He'd earned just shy of 8000 Express from just one well-planned ambush. All four of them had to have been around level 30 or so in strength, give or take, and the two that had been worth more had likely been at least a couple levels higher than that. As for the skills that he had employed, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu has leveled up. LV12 LV13. Doten, Iwa Bunshin no Jutsu has leveled up. LV26 LV27. Doten, Dochu Igyo has leveled up twice. LV6 LV8. Doten, Shinju Zanshu no Jutsu has leveled up twice. LV3 LV5. Backstab has leveled up twice. LV5 LV7. Stealth has leveled up. LV6 6 LV6 7. Short Blades Mastery has leveled up. LV15 LV16. Yeah, he had some pretty good growth there too. This was actually the first time that his stealth skill had leveled up since he'd initially unlocked it. Then again, considering that that particular skill was already over level 60, it likely took quite a bit for it to level up. Wow, you just took out 4 Chunin without even having to get personally involved. Ayame couldn't help but blink in surprise. She and Naruto were the only ones left at their camp, the blonde having delegated the duty of ambushing and taking out the other team of Chunin to the rest of the squad, with Shikamaru acting as commander. The Nara clan heir had grumbled a bit, but had quickly bowed to the inevitable. So what happens next? My clones are already unearthing the bodies and sealing them up in a mortuary scroll I bought. Naruto answered. Once Shika and the others get back, I'll have my clones start to reset all the traps as well as interlaying some more dangerous ones. We can't take on an entire gang of Nuke Nin on our own, and the 4 I downed were obviously on the lower end of the ladder. No way can we hope to survive against 2 Jonin-ranked ninja at once, not without Asuma-sensei and Kurenai-sensei here with us. Heck, my best traps won't likely be able to do more than inconvenience them and maybe slow them down a bit if one of the leaders decides to get involved. The ramen waitress nodded solemnly in agreement. Jonin were the highest-ranking ninja that most of the hidden villages could field for regular missions, save a few elite groups within those ranks. Konoha's own Elite Jonin Corps and Hokage Guard Platoon, Kurigakure's 7 Swordsmen, Sunagakure's Puppet Brigade and Wind Dancer Corps, Kumogakure's Kinkaku Butai, Iwagakure's Explosion Corps, the list went on. There was no way that any genin could do more than make one flinch, so she was personally glad that her surrogate little brother wasn't rushing in head first to confront an enemy far over his current pay grade. Why are you collecting the corpses? She asked aloud, partially out of curiosity and partially to move her thoughts away from the still looming threat. 3 reasons. Naruto responded simply, holding up a closed fist before raising his index finger. First, bounties. Even Chunin-ranked Nuke Nin have a standard bounty payout placed on them by their home villages, even if they're not dangerous, important, or infamous enough to have their own bingo book entry. His middle finger then rose up to join his pointer. 2. The loot. I killed all of them, so that means that I have first claim on any equipment they've got as spoils of war, outside their Hitai 8, which are required to be turned in for the bounty payout, flak jackets, which are prohibited to be taken as spoils by genin, and anything that the intelligence division thinks might have some value. That means, my possible gains include jutsu scroll, fluid cash, and ninja gear and supplies, all of which could be useful for me. Finally, his ring finger rose to join the other 2. 3. Memory. These jokers have already outright attacked and raided an outpost of Konohagakure in broad daylight. They cannot be allowed to just get away with that. I made sure not to damage their brains when I got them, and the mortuary scroll will keep them well preserved, so the Yamanaka clan should be able to extract something about these Karehagakure dumbasses from the corpses. Impressed with the very thought-out answer, Ayame could only nod in acknowledgement while silently wondering just when her little brother had started growing up so much. So, how do you think Shikamaru and the others are handling things? Naruto shrugged slightly. I sent a couple shadow clones with them so that, if they get in trouble, one can dispel to let me know so I can send in reinforcements, but... Who are you calling fat? I'm big-boned. Chubby's bonsai. Oh gods, some idiot decided to stomp right on Choji's berserk button. Naruto groaned out with a facepalm. Ah, yeah, the Akamichi tend to be a bit easily riled up when it comes to their family's pudge. Ayame nodded, well familiar with the scenario. I'd honestly feel sorry for whoever just committed suicide, but these are a bunch of murderous Nuke Nin, so screw them. Ayame ne-chan. Naruto blinked in shock, which just made Ayame giggle. This trip was certainly enlightening him to more sides of his elder sister figure than he'd ever imagined possible. Same time. With Shikamaru. To Nara Shikamaru, his own genius had always seemed to be far more of a curse than a blessing. Like most males born into the Nara clan, he was lazy, unmotivated, and not ashamed of either of the prior 2 qualities in the least. The fact that he was born the heir to a famous ninja clan within one of the major hidden villages meant that he already had far too many expectations and responsibilities placed on him than he would have willingly taken. Also, like most Nara, he was a tactical thinker by nature and quite intelligent. When his dad had discovered that he was also a genius, using an old Nara trick of disguising IQ tests within puzzle and strategy games, those troublesome expectations had only increased. For almost as long as the position had existed within Konoha, the Jonin commander had nearly always been either the Nara clan head or a member of their clan. The only reason they hadn't held the position for as long as they had been a part of Konoha was because it had taken several years for the ninja ranking system the villages now used to fully form and the Jonin commander position itself to be created. All that combined meant that he was pretty much doomed to eventually be forced to rise up the ranks and take on his old man's position himself, much to Shikamaru's displeasure. Was it really so much to ask, he often bemoaned to himself, to just be born a normal ninja, live a regular boring life, and have a regular boring death? But that wasn't even the most troublesome aspect of his life. No, Shikamaru, it seemed to him, had been cursed to be constantly plagued by troublesome women. His mother, Nara Yoshino, was an absolute terror who wielded a frying pan with merciless authority whenever his laziness went too far, or something. Then there was his childhood friend, Yamanaka Ino, who was even louder and more demanding than his own mother. He had honestly seen it as a blessing when the 2 of them had been placed on separate genin teams, a brief reprieve from the endless screaming and scolding. He knew it wouldn't last forever. Of course, the Ino Shika Cho team was too famous and potent a combination to ever allow to be abandoned completely. He was very much aware that, eventually, he was going to have to go back to being bossed around by that blonde diva of a girl. It had only made him that much more determined to enjoy the brief time of peace while he could. Unfortunately, fate had chosen to shatter his hopes and dreams like so much glass when it introduced a third troublesome woman into his life, his new sensei, Yuhi Kurenai. While not as loud as either his mother or Ino, she did not hesitate in telling him off each and every time for his bad habits, pulling rank and authority to make him comply or even threatening to involve his mother, which would be a fate worse than death in Shikamaru's opinion. So yes, Shikamaru often considered himself somewhat cursed in multiple ways. This troublesome world would just not let him be. Right now, he took some minor solace in the fact that he was not the only unfortunate one. Bam! Shikamaru idly watched as one very stupid nuke nin went flying through the air as his other, usually far less troublesome, childhood friend hit him with the full force of his Baika no Jutsu Nikuden Sensha combo, and thus had impacted him with all the force of a boulder that was launched from a catapult. Seriously, what kind of idiot operated so close to Konohagakure without even memorizing the basic cardinal rules of engaging Leaf Shinobi? Rule number 10. Never call an Akamichi any insult that might imply that they were in some way, shape, or form fat. You will be squashed. Gwag. The idiot let out an odd-sounding squawk as he impacted a tree head first while still flying full force via air Akamichi. Given the sound, and the amount of blood leaking out from behind the impact crater, he wasn't going to be a problem anymore. Shikamaru let out an annoyed breath as he looked over the remaining nuke nin and was slightly pleased to see that everything was pretty much handled. The one he and Sakura were dealing with had already been restrained with his ninpo, Kujimane no Jutsu, which had allowed him to hold him in place for Sakura to safely use her sweetened ninpo, Mizwame Bakuho, to cover most of his body in chakra-altered liquid that rapidly hardened and prevented any movement. Hinata, the shy Hyuga heiress and one of the least troublesome women that Shikamaru had ever met, if one did not count her rather obvious crush on Naruto, had already taken out one of the other enemy nuke nin with a few quick strikes of her Juken Taijutsu. The opposing Kunoichi had been utterly unable to dodge Hinata's initial strike after they'd launched their ambush, and that had been enough to completely disable one of her arms. The Hyuga heiress had been able to rapidly disable the older Kunoichi after that, even as she desperately struggled to create distance. Ino, on the other hand, had simply started blasting at her target, a rather bulky man that Shikamaru had quickly pegged as the group's taijutsu expert based on his body type, uniform, and movements, with a barrage of Kaiden jutsu before he could even get close to her. First a Kaiden Enden that had sent the man backwards, scorched but alive. When he tried to get up, he was suddenly engulfed by a swarm of miniature fireballs from a Kaiden, Hotarubi. Then he was suddenly completely encircled by flames from a Kaiden, Hibashiri. Who thought it was a good idea to teach Ino of all people so many Kaiden techniques? Shikamaru was now sure that he was doomed. He could already envision the bossy girl literally spitting fire at him whenever he annoyed her from now on, as opposed to how she only did so metaphorically these days. He was so going to blame Naruto for this one. Apparently letting the troublesome blondes co-mingle only led to making them both even more troublesome. Who would have guessed? There, that should take care of that. Sakura announced as she finished inspecting her work. Trusting her judgment, and only partially out of sloth, Shikamaru immediately released his Kujimane and the trapped ninja immediately began to try and struggle out of the position they'd stuck him in. While a Chunin might be expected to be able to break out of a single layer of set Mizwame Bakuho, Sakura had been sure to ensnare him under no less than 4 different layers. Plus, the position Shikamaru had shifted him into while under his jutsu was designed to make all that much harder to bring a significant amount of muscular power to bear at a single point. Unless the man was a particularly strong taijutsu expert, he wasn't. Shikamaru had already noted that his frame, the extra weapon pouches he carried, and his position in his team's formation as they advanced all spoke of a rearguard specialized in shuriken jutsu. He wasn't going to be going anywhere. The nuke nin seemed to realize that after only a few moments of struggling. Instead, he decided to focus his remaining energy on hurling threats at the gathered genin, ignoring that his teammates were all either dead or unconscious. You fucking, interfering brats. The man snarled out. Just you wait till the bosses show up. They'll turn you little punks into bloody chunks, and that's only if. Maybe, maybe not. Shikamaru drawled out as he ambled over to the man. It depends on how fast our Jonin-sensei can get back from whatever distraction you manage to set for them. And, as troublesome as they are, neither of our sensei are anything close to pushovers. Before the snarling Nuke Nin could even respond, Shikamaru pulled a kunai out from his back pouch and slammed the butt directly into his jaw, sending the man to La La Land. The last thing that Shikamaru wanted to deal with was some mouthy asshole insulting Ino or Sakura and the troublesome females starting one of their shrieking fits on them. As they finished securing and transporting the 3 alive, albeit one extremely charred and smoking, prisoners and one corpse back to the clearing, Shikamaru could only scowl slightly as Naruto explained that he'd already sealed up the 4 that he'd killed by himself. Clones didn't really count, in a mortuary scroll, that he'd somehow pulled out of nowhere, and that his clones had already set to work both resetting and hiding the old traps as well as setting up some new ones. So, was it just me or were these guys just way too easy to beat? Sakura asked. Looking around after the genin had regrouped, a small group of Cage Bunshin keeping a weather eye on the unconscious and bound prisoners. I mean, a team of 4 Chunin should, on paper at least, be able to easily beat 5 genin, but these guys practically walked right into our ambush. It's like they've had absolutely no training in forest craft and there was absolutely no coordination or teamwork between them. The lack of forest craft is pretty easy to explain, most of these guys seem to be from Kurigakure. Shikamaru pointed out simply, 3 of their 4 enemies had been Kiri Nuke Nin, with a single Konoha Nuke Nin mixed in. Yeah, some of the bigger islands over there have forests, but where our academy and training focuses on forest craft and combat, theirs focuses on how to survive on the ocean, aquatic combat and tactics, and how to sail. Learning forest craft is something they'd have to pick up on their own, which would mean that a lot of them likely didn't before it became necessary. And the Konoha Nuke Nin among them didn't seem all that eager to speak up, either. It honestly didn't look like they were even taking this seriously. Hunting and getting rid of a small group of genin should have been just grunt work for a group at their level. They got overconfident and paid for it. As for the disharmony, I'd say that there was a hostile takeover of this Kurigakure group recently and one side is still smarting from where the Kurigakure Nuke Nin seems to have taken over. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Naruto agreed with a nod. That 7 swordsman wannabe likely kicked the former leader's rear so he and his took over. The team I took down was being led by a Kiri Nuke Nin, with another Kiri Nuke Nin, a Kusa Nuke 9, and a former Konoha sensor type. I honestly think that they sent the bottom of the barrel after us, keeping the stronger members back to focus on the attack and the distraction. Like you said, killing a bunch of genin should have just been busywork. Once whoever is in charge realizes that these bozos aren't coming back, then someone a lot stronger and a lot more cautious is going to come after us. Maybe even one of the Jonin. Shikamaru grunted in annoyance, but nodded his agreement at the fairly logical conclusion to 2 Chunin teams seemingly vanishing. I'd like to say that the Jonin themselves wouldn't bother, unless they were bored. He opined. But Naruto makes a good point. More are going to be coming soon, and they're going to be a lot more dangerous. You are damned right about that, brats. A new rough voice growled out from the opposite end of the clearing. Turning, the genin caught sight of a man standing atop one of the trees on the clearing's edge. He was a large man, with blue skin, sharp teeth, and black markings that looked like gills on his neck. He wore a thick coat that was the same gray with black stripes camo pattern that Kiri ninjas seemed to favor, and he had a bandolier slung diagonally over one of his shoulders, loaded up with a dozen kunai that hand-curve blades rather than the usual straight ones. His hitai was on a gray cloth band tied lopsidedly on his bald head and he wore a pair of leg-warmer, shinobi sandal hybrids that were done in the gray and black camo. However, it was the weapon that he was carrying with ease in one hand that drew all of their attention. It was a massive weapon, about 3 meters in length from the tip of the blade to the base of the hilt. The suka looked to be at least twice the length of a normal weapons, but the blade itself was what really caught the eye. Rather than a single blade, the center was actually a narrow pole attached to the suka, with 6 large, curved, fang-like blades that greatly resembled shark teeth emerging down either side. Observe. Naruto whispered, eyes locked on the weapon. Kuribaki. Shadow Sword of the Mist. Ultra rare. The prototype that was used to develop the infamous Kubikiribocho that is one Kurigakure's vaunted 7 Swords of the Mist. The 7 shadow swords of the mist are a set of 7 blades that acted as the final prototypes, proof of concepts, and test models for the chakra blades that would eventually be forged to create the mist's treasure blades. Kiribaki cutting plectrum is also known as the Nokogirito sawtooth blade due to the sharp tooth design that was used for its blades. Like the child blade that would be born from it, Kiribaki has the ability to rapidly regenerate any damage done to itself by drawing in the iron from the bloods of anyone it cuts, or just any blood gets too close to it. While the sawtooth design proved to be effective for cutting through swaths of weaker enemies, it proved disadvantageous when dealing with more high-level opponents who could take advantage of the openings the blade design created, leading to Kubikiribocho's final design being altered to a single large, smooth blade. Stats currently cannot be viewed. That, Naruto knew, was very not good. So, you kids managed to take down my troops. Hoshigaki Chikua offered with deliberate slowness as he eyed the prone forms of his subordinates. I can see 3 of them. What happened to the other 5? Dead. Naruto answered simply, stepping to the forefront of their group. I took care of the team you sent. The other had a member that was stupid enough to throw around a certain insult when Choji was involved. The man's eyes quickly locked onto Naruto, studying him for a moment, his eyes lingering for a moment on the clan marker on his shoulder armor, before moving to the others. He quickly noticed the clan emblem on Choji's shirt. Ah. Someone called an Akamichi fat to their face, huh? He acknowledged with a low chuckle. Must have been Ikus, that dumbass never did know how to keep his mouth shut even when his life depended on it. So what happens now? You've only got so much time before our Jonin-sensei get back from dealing with whatever distraction you set up. You might be stronger than all of us put together, but you're definitely not strong enough to match an elite Jonin and a regular Jonin on your own, even with Kiribaki in hand. The Jinchuriki asked evenly. Oh, so you actually know the name of my blade, how very interesting. Chikua's smirk grew just a bit sharper. And you were right, if I tried to fight the Smoking Guardian and the Genjutsu Mistress face to face, then I likely wouldn't be able to win. Still, I can deal them quite a painful blow, by getting rid of all of you. Losing their teams will certainly be a nasty blow to their prides and spirits if nothing else, and it certainly won't take too long. Shika, take a Yame-ne and everyone else. Naruto stated coldly, not taking his eyes off the nuke nin as he drew out his tanto and assumed a combat position. I'll cover your retreat. Hurry up and link with our Jonin-sensei. No arguing. Not a bad judgment call there, boya. The nuke nin remarked, his smirk growing slightly in amusement. But really now, do you honestly think that you can fight off a Jonin? All by yourself. You'll die a single swing before you get a chance to move. Behind Naruto, one of his clones poofed out of existence, even as a wave of protests from his teammates and Ayame started to rise. What kind of swordsman would I be if I didn't take the opportunity to test myself against something like the shadow swords of the mist? Naruto responded simply. Nara Shikamaru, stop hesitating and go. That finally got the Nara heir to start moving, along with the rest of the genin, Ayame running off with them reluctantly, leaving Naruto facing off against the Jonin on his own. I'm honestly surprised that you didn't even try to just chase after them. The Jinchuriki remarked amicably. Meh. A Nara, an Akamichi, a Yamanaka, a Hyuga, and some random civilian-raised brat. Not all that interesting, I'll have plenty of chances to fight enemies like them in the future. Chikua answered with a shrug, before he refocused on Naruto and grinned savagely, his grip on his blade shifting. But getting to face down an Uzumaki, none of my clan has had the chance to fight one of yours since we helped wipe out Uzushiogakure. And if the stories the old-timers back home like to tell about your clan are anything close to true, then you'll be a far more interesting fight than all the rest put together. I can always just hunt them down once we finish here, but for now you've got my full attention. I'll try and make it worth your time. Naruto replied dryly. All of his clones were forming up either with or around him as he prepared for the toughest fight of his life. Dealing with a chump like Mizuki was one thing, but a Jonin. Hoo boy, he was not going to have good day with this. Well then, shall we begin? Hoshigaki Chikua asked, a bloodthirsty sneer on his face. Several minutes earlier. With Asuma and Kurenai. Blarg. The Nuke Nin's final breath came with a burst of blood from his mouth as the knuckles of Asuma's trench knife smashed into his neck, crushing his windpipe and snapping his spine. Blood dribbling down his lips, the man fell to the ground as he joined his fellows in death. Phew now, the bearded let out a breath as he eyed the roughly 20 bodies scattered around them. Still not back in tip-top shape just yet, but I'm getting there. Hey, Kurenai, don't kill that one, we need some information. The Genjutsu mistress paused from where she was just about to place an explosive tag onto the chest of the last living Nuke Nin so she could finish activating her Magen Jubaku Bakusatsu no Jutsu demonic illusion, tree-binding explosive death jutsu before she nodded absently and withdrew the tag. The Nuke Nin, a man who was almost abnormally average in nearly every way and wore a slashed-out Kusagakur Hitai 8 across his forehead, let out a shuddering breath as Kurenai released him from her illusion, before it seemingly caught in his throat as he caught sight of the corpses of what had once been the vast majority of 5 teams of Chunin from Karehagakur. His eyes were impossibly wide and fearful as they turned to the 2 Jonin responsible for this one-sided massacre. Monsters. He whimpered out, looking ready to bolt before he felt cold steel resting against his throat. Faster than he could follow, Asuma had closed the distance between them and was now resting the blade of one of his trench knives almost casually against his throat. Not really, you and your friends here are just that weak. I'm honestly surprised that you all managed to reach Chunin rank with so little actual strength before you ran off. Asuma responded almost casually as he absently shrugged the shoulder, not holding the man's life on a razor's edge. The kami only know how out of shape I am after years of soft assignments, and I still didn't even break a sweat dealing with the lot of you. What the hell have you lot been doing since you went rogue, because it's obvious you haven't been keeping your training up. The Nuke Nin clamped his mouth shut and tried to look away as much as he could without slitting his own throat. Going to try and walk down that path, huh? The smoking guardian sounded darkly amused as he chuckled. Now, I don't recognize you, so I'm guessing that you were just another small fry back in Kusa and your village decided not to bother wasting the resources it would take to place a bounty on you after you deserted. Probably the same story for most of your little gang if your performance here is any indicator. The man didn't speak, but he did turn his attention back to Asuma to glower at the bearded Sarutobi. Hit a sore spot, did I? Asuma nodded sagely. Well, I'm afraid that I really don't have the time or the interest to care about the feelings of some C-rank Nuke Nin. Right now, I have a few questions that I need answers for, chief among them being just how many shinobi are there in your little troop. While smiling and relaxed on the outside, internally Asuma was starting to get worried. Most groups of Nuke Nin rarely exceeded more than 10 members, particularly when they were from mixed villages like this bunch. The factitious, backstabbing, and overly ambitious natures that made them all turn their backs on their respective villages simply made keeping larger groups together all but impossible, unless there was someone strong and brutal enough at the head to keep all the lower-level thugs in line out of pure fear. This group had just thrown 20 low-tier Chunin at him and Kurenai like it was nothing, knowing that the vast majority weren't going to survive the encounter, and that was a major cause for concern. That meant that this group had to be big enough that there were likely still more than enough Nuke Nin left out there to attack the Shukuba town and overwhelm its defenders. The Nuke Nin opposite him grit his teeth, but his face was defiant and he maintained his silence. Fine, guess we have to do this the quick and painful way. Don't say I didn't give you an out, bub. The smoking guardian let out an annoyed huff before nodding towards his companion, who quickly went through a series of hand signs. Kurenai. Magen. Narakumi. Demonic illusion. Hell viewing. Kurenai intoned calmly, her red eyes locked onto the Nuke Nins. While a fairly low-level genjutsu, it was also an incredibly useful and versatile one that Kurenai always found ready use for. Instead of imputing a specific illusion into a target's mind, the hell viewing technique instead pulled on a target's deeply seated fears, some they themselves might not even be aware of, and used them to trap the target in a terrifying illusion. And that was only the technique's most basic application. A true master or mistress of genjutsu could further hone and manipulate the Narakumi so that it would dive even deeper, pulling out the most primal, instinctive fears that dwelled deep within the human hindbrain, the lizard brain that controlled human instinct at its most basic level. The Nuke Nin instantly began to scream, his eyes bulging wide and his pupils dilating as his face rapidly distorted into a rictus of terror while Kurenai's genjutsu did its work. Then, Kai. The black-haired woman chanted softly, ending the jutsu. The man slumped forward, nearly slicing his own throat on Asuma's trench knife, but a quick hand from the bearded Jonin kept him upright enough that he only ended up nicking his throat. The slight, sharp pain was enough to restore some small bit of consciousness to the missing nin, who looked between the two in renewed, wild-eyed terror. Wah! How? The man stammered out, barely able to speak as his brain scrambled to make sense of what he had just experienced. Well, she is Konoha's genjutsu mistress. Asuma pointed out absently. A master of any art can do some pretty terrifying things with the basic techniques of their chosen skill set, and that was just a very basic taste of what she can do with it. You're going to go under something far worse for a bit longer if you don't start telling me what I want to know. So, do we have drag this out and put you through enough shit that your mind breaks and then we have drag out our answers from your half-brain-dead living corpse, or can we just get this over with quickly? Slumping, the failure of a nuke nin could only offer a small whimper before he answered. What do you want to know? It didn't take much longer for Asuma and Kurenai to get all the information that they needed out of the former Kusa ninja. 30 more chunin, a small bushel of genin, and a pair of jonin. The smoking guardian couldn't help but let out a short whistle. Combine that with the 20 chunin here and that's a military force that might be able to take on one of the smaller minor villages. Most nuke nin groups can never get this big. Is this some kind of effect from Naruto's gamer power? Asuma thought in concern. The reality warping aspect of the gamer had been concerning when he'd first been convinced that his student's strange power actually existed, and now it was starting to get even more worrying. Naruto might be the gamer, but he didn't seem to have absolute control of the gamer itself, as contradictory as that might sound. If that thing was capable of manipulating circumstances to allow such a large group of nuke nin to form with an intent to attack Konoha, then Asuma was even less enthused about this strange otherworldly power than he'd previously been. Asuma, we need to get back to our genin. The threat is a lot worse than we could have expected. Kurenai stated seriously, pulling him from his thoughts. Yeah, you've got a point there. The senior of the two jonin agreed, absently pulling back and reversing the grip on his trench knife. Well, thanks for the help. Your payment will be a swift, painless death. Fuck. The Kusa nuke nin could only let out a resigned groan before Asuma briefly reactivated his hin and took off his head with a single, swift swing. The two jonin were already moving as the body collapsed with a small fountain of blood escaping from the exposed neck, speeding their way back in the direction of the Shukuba. The entire caravan that they'd been sent to find had already been torn to pieces by the time they arrived, with the employees either captured or slaughtered like cattle alongside the guards. A pointless act of bloodshed, but the kind that was far too common among nuke nin. Someone in Anbu is gonna lose their head when Oyaji finds out that they somehow missed something like this brewing right outside our umbrella. Asuma grumbled, not feeling all that empathetic for the masked protectors of the village. Their main bailiwick might have been assassinations and internal security within the village, but they were often sent out on discreet patrols throughout Hai no Kuni as well. Strictly speaking, that was what the patrol corps were for, except that their attention was mostly focused on Fire Country's borders rather than internal patrols. The speed at which a pair of jonin could move when they really wanted to run was honestly quite the sight to see. They hadn't been moving at that kind of speed when they'd left the Shukuba, since they were keeping any eye out for signs of the caravans, but right now they were moving at top speeds as they headed back towards the village. That meant that they reached the outskirts of the forest that sat near the town's edge within a few minutes. As they traveled, both kept a weather eye open for any signs of more ninja being about, but any trace they caught sight was at least a few minutes old. Whoever had been standing between them and the Shukuba had obviously seen the way the wind was blowing and ran off. Yikes, well that certainly doesn't look good. Asuma winced as he caught sight of thick, black smoke rising out from the Shukuba. And, Kurenai, did you just feel that? Now, neither Asuma nor Kurenai were sensor nin, but any ninja who reached a certain level started to become a bit more sensitive to foreign chakra. It was usually just enough to feel when strong chakra was being used nearby, and just a few seconds ago both had felt two very strong chakra sources flare up somewhere from within the forest, and one of them was familiar to the both of them. Naruto's trying to fight a Jonin. Kurenai stated grimly. Damn it, why is he trying to fight a Jonin? Asuma groaned out. If something happened to his favorite orphan, then the Hokage would skin him alive for it. In a flash, the two Jonin sensei were darting through the forest, heading towards where the chakra flares were originating from. As they moved through the forest, the sound of multiple explosions became clearly audible, and it wasn't coming from the place where Naruto's chakra was still flaring about wildly, which meant, shit, the other genin are also in combat. Asuma cursed aloud. What's the plan? Kurenai deferred to him on this one, considering he had more field experience. Arg, the Sarutobi groaned in annoyance. Naruto's chakra is still going strong, that means he's in good health. He should be able to hold his own for at least a little while. The others are likely being chased by Chunin and maybe even the other Jonin. We need to get to them first and ensure they're safe. Once we've got them in a secure enough position, one of us can peel off and assist Naruto. It was a bit of a cold decision, but it was one that had to be made in these circumstances. Naruto was not only an Uzumaki but he was also a Jinchuriki and had his own special power in the gamer at his disposal. If any of the genin in Konoha could be trusted to survive against a Jonin for at least a few minutes, other than the eternal genin himself, then it would be Naruto Uzumaki. The rest of their students, however, had nowhere near the same level of survivability and needed to be rescued fast. Especially since the client Ichiraku Ayame, a half-trained academy-level non-combatant, was likely with the larger group. Asuma was just hoping that he made the right judgment call here. With Naruto. Ever since he had gained the power of the gamer, Naruto had met, faced down, and defeated several powerful foes. The berserk fox squirrel Mogura Wagura, the massive mole, and Toji Mizuki were among the most dangerous and powerful enemies that he had fought and managed to defeat. However, the two times that he had ended up even lightly sparring against a Jonin-level opponent, once against Maida Guy and once against Sarutobi Asuma, had ended with him being completely and utterly defeated with little to no effort from his enemies. So, perhaps even better than the rest of his and Shikamaru's teams, he knew just how momentously stupid he was being when he decided to try and play rearguard to hold off a nuke ninjanin. Especially one with the kind of stats that he was facing. Name: Hoshigaki Chikua. Class: Elite Ninja Swordsman. Level: 35. Title: Member of the Shadow Swordsmen of the Mist, Leader of Karehagakure. HP: 44,415. CP: 4,500. STR: 235. Santa: 189. Dex: 250. Int: 100. Wis: 45. Luck: 25. Special status: Swordmaster, greatly increases damage with all sword-type weapons. Hoshigaki clan member, slows mental stat improvement, greatly enhances physical stat improvement. Increased experience gains with the Sake projection skill. Atrophied, reduces effectiveness of all physical stats and skill. Hoshigaki Chikua is a nuke nin formerly of Karehagakure, the Bloody Mist. He was forced to flee shortly after the Yondaime Mizukage turned against his clan after his most famous kinsman, Hoshigaki Kisame, went rogue. Working together with a small group of other deserting Jonin, they managed to steal the 7 shadow swords of the mist from where they were kept in storage, claiming Kuribaki for himself while the other 6 were claimed by the other members of his short-lived alliance. Bloodthirsty and battle-hungry like the vast majority of his clan tends to be, Chikua was once considered as a possible candidate to become one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist. However, life as a nuke nin has allowed him to develop many bad habits and his skills have started to atrophy from that. Still, he remains a ruthless, battle-hungry man without a trace of either pity or mercy. He is not an opponent to be faced lightly. Yeah, this was just plain fucked up. His observed skill had finally reached a high enough level that he could at least see his opponent's stats and everything, but the special status section still only gave him vague descriptors of what benefits or penalties each status provided. That meant he had no idea just how much atrophied was actually reducing his enemy's stats and skills. At the moment, he wasn't even trying to fight this monster directly, instead he was staying back and sending in his Kage Bunshin and Iwa Bunshin to attack, hoping to get some idea of what he was dealing with. Unfortunately, that wasn't working out so well. Every great sweep of that overly long and wickedly sharp weapon of his allowed Hoshigaki Chikua to wipe out full handfuls of his clones at once, though it was rapidly apparent that he wasn't using anything other than basic body enhancement and swordsmanship right now. Right, this isn't going to work. Naruto concluded. Not only are the clones, copies of Tsubaki and Sumaire not going to be able to get close enough to actually hit him, even Kogetsu Kyushiki wouldn't have the reach necessary to overcome that damned oversized handsaw. And trying to use Iwa Bunshin is just wasting my chakra. They might be more durable than Kage Bunshin, but a single swing of that thing is still more than enough to smash them to bits. I'm going to have to change things up if I want to survive this. Sheathing the real Tsubaki and Sumaire, Naruto pushed his chakra out once more as he formed the clone hand sign. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. In a large explosion of smoke, 80-odd copies of himself, the maximum number that he could currently make using the combination of his large chakra pool and the benefits of his Shadowmaster perk, appeared around him. Well now, not too shabby, kid. But clones are just clones, and these flimsy things can't do jack to me. The Nuke Nin Jonin commented idly with a smirk, idly bisecting one of the few remaining shadow clones of the initial attack rush from crown to groin with a casual ease, popping it and, unbeknownst to Chikua, restoring Naruto's chakra pool by a full 100 CP thanks, once again, to the Shadowmaster perk. Yeah, well, let's try this with a new dance step then. Naruto shot back. Now. Bunshin Senjutsu. Kage no Jin. Clone tactics. Wall formation. The clones shouted in unison as they quickly moved into formation, rapidly leaping onto each other's shoulders until they stood as a human wall, 12 clones long and 7 clones tall. Then each and every clone reached into their supply pouches before smoothly drawing out and throwing a bushel of shuriken using the maxed out Hiko Yoshin fast draw technique. Hey, just another kid's game. Chikua scoffed out, readying to simply sweep away the incoming swarm of shuriken with a swing of his sword. The clones just smiled mirthlessly as half of them started to flip through a series of 8 hand signs in perfect sync. Ox right pointing arrow, dog right pointing arrow, dragon right pointing arrow, rat right pointing arrow, dog right pointing arrow, boar right pointing arrow, snake right pointing arrow, tiger. The other half started half a moment later with a different series of hand signs. Snake right pointing arrow, ram right pointing arrow, boar right pointing arrow, horse right pointing arrow, bird right pointing arrow, handclap. Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The first group of clones roared out, turning the fairly large swarm of shuriken that was already flying towards Chikua into a veritable rainstorm of bladed death bearing down on lone Nuke Nin, making his eyes widen slightly. Futon. Repusho. The second group roared out a half-second later and the Hoshigaki's eyes bulged out as the air around the clones suddenly surged forwards, slamming into the shuriken and sending the entire blade storm flying forward even faster than before. Holy shit! Chikua shouted in panic, even as he formed a set of seals of his own. Suiten. Suiro no Jutsu. Water release. Water prison technique. Water surged out of his mouth, rapidly spilling outward and swirling around him. In less than a second, he was completely encased in a perfect orb of water, just before the surge of flying steel fell upon him. The way water will react when something is thrown into it rather interesting. If something like a polystyrene ball is thrown, even by one of the most physically powerful people in the world, then it would never do anything more than cause the water to ripple or generate a splash as the force was dissipated and the ball refused to go under. If something less buoyant is thrown, like say a steel throwing star, then the object in question will go beneath the water's surface, rapidly losing speed and power as the water's own inertia causes it to rapidly bleed off force and momentum until it was merely sinking in the water. This same rule would apply to even something like a shuriken that has been augmented by a wind jutsu. The main difference would be the amount of speed and force that the shuriken had to bleed off when it hits the water's surface. The surface of the Suiro was not, as some might believe, anything more than normal water compressed and formed into a new shape by the user's chakra, with the technique itself having no inherently advanced defensive attributes outside the chakra that is enhancing the surface tension of the water in order to hold it in the proper shape. Yes, the water within is heavy and densely compacted, making it difficult to move in, and a master of the technique, which Chikua was not, could even increase the strength of the surface tension to the point that it becomes almost rubber-like in the way it dissipated force, but in the end it was still only water. Thus, when a swarm of hundreds of wind-enhanced shurikens slammed into the orb, it could only do so much to slow and weaken the onrushing shuriken, even as Hoshigaki Chikua used his own sword as a shield to momentarily block the storm of blades so he could make good an escape. Worse, Chikua had forgotten something very important in his haste to form a last-minute defense. While the water prison jutsu was created and held together by its user's chakra, every jutsu had its limits. The Suiro no Jutsu could form impressive amounts of surface tension to keep the construct it formed into shape, but with dozens, if not hundreds, of different, small bladed edges striking at it near simultaneously, there was only so much it could do before the chakra holding it together was worn and stretched so thin to the point that it snapped. Thus, the water prison collapsed suddenly and without warning seconds after the assault began, leaving its occupant exposed for the hair of a second that it took his reflexes to kick in. That millisecond was more than enough time for his body to be utterly pummeled by over 100 of the shuriken that were filling the air. His Kurigaker ninja coat was both thick and lightly armored, so it granted some degree of protection to most of his limbs and vitals, but by the time he was able to finish activating the Mizu Shunshin water body flicker, that he'd already been preparing to escape the deluge of metal, he still had numerous new cuts and scratches across his hands, the exposed portions of his torso, with several more embedded into the material of his ninja coat or embedded in Kuribaki's unusually shaped blades. Shit. Just holy fucking shit. What the hell? He growled out as he reappeared in one of the nearby trees, looking utterly pissed. As the nuke nin was cursing up a storm, nearly all of the shuriken that were littering the ground and trees puffed away in hundreds of small clouds of chakra smoke, blanketing the ground for a moment. As this happened, Naruto discovered another interesting facet of the combination of the Shadow Master perk, the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, and the Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu when he used the two technique in tandem, as in performing the exact type of maneuver Naruto had just used against Hoshigaki Chikua. When the shuriken created as a result of the former using the latter dispersed, Naruto received back both the chakra that had gone into creating the shuriken shadow clones and the chakra that had been used to create the shadow clones shuriken. Useful to know. Alright, brat, I'm starting to see what the oldsters were talking about when they called your clan a bunch of damn dangerous bastards. Chikua snarled out as he pointed his sword at the clone wall. But I am done playing around with you. I'm gonna chop ya into pieces and then I'm going to hunt down your little friends to finish this day on a high note. As if we haven't heard that kind of bullcrap before. A Naruclone scoffed back as the clones leapt apart, breaking up the Kade no Jin. Come on boys, let's start turning up the heat on this fish. Forming the tiger hand sign, that particular shadow clone drew in a sharp breath. Kaden, Hibashiri. Then the clone exhaled sharply, sending out a steam of fire shooting forwards, wrapping around the group of trees that the Jonin was standing on. On its own, the technique wouldn't have done much, but at the same time. Futon. Daitapa. 4 other Kage Bunshin shouted simultaneously, each clapping their hands together as they finished their own set of seals and sending a massive funnel of winds directly towards the flames created by the Hibashiri. As the two jutsu combined, the massive flames burned even hotter and surged upwards towards the nuke nin, forcing him to leap into the air to avoid being caught in the surging flames. As he did, one of Naruto's few remaining Iwa Bunshin quickly used the henge to transform itself into a solid Fuma Shuriken, which was grabbed out of the air by another shadow clone before being thrown directly at Chikua, and just as it was getting into range. Ninpo. Shuriken Goshin. The clone shouted, making the tiger hand sign. Immediately afterwards, the already large shuriken erupted into a large cloud of smoke before emerging less than a second later at least 4 times its previous size. It slammed directly into the still mid-air Jonin nuke nin, its massive blades cleaving right through his shinobi jacket and nearly bisecting him diagonally, before he exploded in a puff of smoke, replaced with a log. Enough fucking games, you little shit. Suiten. Bakusui Shoha no Jutsu. Water release. Exploding water colliding wave technique. The shark-skinned man howled out from just a bit deeper into the woods, unleashing a massive amount of water from his mouth that immediately exploded outwards, rapidly flooding the area and knocking over several intervening trees as it surged forwards. The last of Naruto's Iwa Bunshin were instantly swept under and destroyed by the onrushing water, along with more than a few of his Kage Bunshin, particularly those that had already used up a good portion of their chakra. The rest leapt into the air, sticking themselves to the nearby trees, though most quickly were quickly forced to fall or dive back into the water, though thankfully not with enough force to dispel most of them, as most of their chosen anchors broke and fell under the force of the rushing waters. Naruto himself was safe, having secreted himself underground while his clones had been attacking using one of his more rarely used jutsu, Doden, Mogaragakure. Hollowing out a large enough space around him, Naruto quickly formed another shadow clone before popping it, relaying new orders to the roughly 40 or so clones that had managed to survive the initial attack. He really needed to learn that water walking exercise that he'd heard about at some point. This was getting kind of ridiculous. As the jutsu ended, where there had once been a patch of woodlands, there now stood what looked like a man-made lake, with only a few particularly stubborn or sturdy tree managing to rise up out of it. Rather than forming a circular sphere of water, Chikua had instead shaped the result of his strongest jutsu into a flattened disc, with the edge of the water rising a good 2 or 3 stories above the forest's floor. Standing atop the chakra-created pond that had momentarily replaced a good portion of the forest, Hoshigaki Chikua huffed slightly, recovering from having to use so much of his chakra for a single technique. The Bakusui Shoha was easily one of the most powerful techniques in his arsenal, but it was also a major chakra hog, even for a Jonin. As he was, it was just inside his grasp to use. He'd always had smaller reserves than the chakra monsters that tended to come out of his clan. Even as a Jonin his reserves were average at best. It was one of the more obvious reasons why he had long ago decided to focus on mastering the art of the sword. Fucking hell, so that's what fighting in Uzumaki was like. The oldsters weren't just flapping their gums after all. Fuck, that was just a young one too, a genin. What kind of utter nightmares must the adult Jonin members of that clan been to fight? He thought, a savage, satisfied grin on his lips. And they call the Hoshigaki a clan of monsters. Ha. Man, no wonder most of the invasion force got utterly shredded when they tried attacking that bunch on their home ground. Still, I just buried the little bastard under a brand fucking new lake. There's no way in hell he's going to get up after that. Just then, several hands erupted out of the nearby water to grab onto both of his ankles. Looking down, he caught sight of a half-dozen of the clones, all grinning up at him from beneath the water. He had a sudden premonition of just what exactly was about to happen. Don't even fucking think about it. He snarled as he raised Kiribaki. Suiten. Shinju Zanshu no Jutsu. Water style. Double suicide decapitation jutsu. One clone's head breached the surface just long enough to say as Chikua was abruptly dragged underwater by a water element adaptation of one of the most basic bitch D rank ninjutsu in existence. How utterly fucking humiliating. Unfortunately, unlike a great many members of Kurigakure's fighting forces, including the vast majority of his own clan, Chikua was not well trained in fighting underwater. He could throw around Suiten jutsu just fine, he had the ability to hold his breath like a goddamn champ just like any other Hoshigaki worth the name, and he could swim just fine and dandy, but he had never gotten the taste for trying to imitate the sharks that were his clan's symbol. When he fought, he liked it to be where he could have both feet firmly planted on the ground as the Rikido Sennin intended, thank you very much. The main reason for this was, embarrassingly enough, the result of nearly drowning during his early childhood and the trauma having left him with a rather severe distaste for being underwater, something that his utter bastard of a clansman, Hoshigaki Kisame had never let him live down. The man might have been an utter badass and had well earned his monikers of, the tailed beast without a tail, and the monster of the hidden mist, but he was also an obnoxious asshole. Still, he was a Jonin and he was dealing with fragile as fuck clones of a damned genin. It took only a moment of focused effort to pop the half-dozen little shits that were trying to drag him under with a single, well-aimed swing of Kiribaki. Even as he started kicking back towards the surface, he caught sight of at least 10 more of the damned blonde bastards clones floating a distance away with their fists drawn back and were those fucking goddamn dragon heads forming around their fists. That did not look good. With a roar, the Naruclones all punched forward simultaneously, sending what looked like 10 serpentine dragons spiraling towards him through the water. The wind jutsu, because he could practically feel the wind chakra cutting through the water, homed in on him with an unerring accuracy even as he tried to get himself back to the surface so he could get some more distance. In the end, it was all he could do to twist around and use his Kiribati to intercept the attacks before they could fully hit him head-on. As Kiribati shook and rattled in his grasp as it took the brunt of the wind-water dragon's fury, Chakua felt even more chakra building up behind him and he quickly craned his neck around to look over his shoulder. 10 more of those goddamned clones, seriously. How did a kid have that much chakra and not explode or something? Uzumaki or not, this was just plain bullshit. Had just finished forming their own hand signs, ending in the dragon hand sign. 10 whirlpools suddenly formed in front of each of the wide-spaced clones, each forming a minute maelstrom of rushing currents before they each shot towards Chakua. His mind idly noticed that the streams were leaving behind a shit ton of what looked like flower petals floating in their wake. Fuck, this is going to hurt like hell. He groaned to himself in the instant before the 10 surging currents of water slammed into his back. Outside the edge of the forest's new lake, Naruto ejected himself out of the ground and walked up the side of a thickly leafed tree. The plan he'd ordered his clones to execute should be coming to a conclusion any second now. Wait, what's happening to the water? The Jinchuriki thought, eyes sharpening as he focused on the water that had engulfed a good portion of the forest. As the water, churning. From what he could see, the water near the center of newly made lake was visibly moving around rather violently, as if multiple currents were colliding just beneath the surface, which, if his plan was working, made a whole lot of sense. 10 simultaneous uses of futon. Hanachiori might colliding head-on with another 10 simultaneous uses of futon. Ryaha, hopefully with Hoshigaki Chakua in the middle, was going to create quite a bit of backlash. Nodding to himself, Naruto created another 40 shadow clones and sent them out to start the second stage of his plan. Quickly leapfrogging among the trees that surrounded the artificial lake's outer edges, the clones quickly got themselves into their assigned positions, positioning themselves around a certain area of the artificial body of water. As they did, Naruto absently concluded that he was likely going to get quite a few new skills and an utter shitload of skill-ups if he managed to survive this fight. Fortunately, a newly discovered aspect of his gamer interface, found just last night actually, had allowed him to set things so those kinds of messages would only show up at the end of a fight. Once every clone was in position, they immediately began a set of identical hand signs, ending in the snake hand sign. Raiden. Denko Seka. 20 identical voices called as one, extending their hands towards the water's edge. Crackling purple electricity ran up their arms before arcing off of them, rapidly condensing and forming into dozens of grapefruit-sized snowflake-like shapes before they shot out into the water, quickly dispersing as their electrical charge was dispersed. And the clones just kept pouring more and more chakra into that particular jutsu, sending in a large, constant stream of electrically charged chakra shooting into the mass of water. Now normally, sending a small stream of electricity into such a large body of water would be all but pointless. The electrical charge carried a single flake generated by the Denko Seka technique was barely worse than a particularly nasty static shock. It was painful and could possibly cause a bit of numbness, but that was it. However, there were two key factors that altered this equation. Firstly, this was not a single burst of electricity, but a full blizzard of hundreds if not thousands of said bursts being generated and released near constantly into the water. Secondly, there was a person in the near center of the water that was currently holding onto a very large metal object, which was currently acting much like a lightning rod for all the electricity that was being pumped through the similarly conductive elements in the water. The fact that chakra-generated electricity did not perfectly mirror its natural counterpart, still being partially directed and controlled by the user's will, also aided in this endeavor. The end result of these changes was a rather large amount of electricity finding its way directly towards the still submerged form of Kiribati before being channeled down its length and into its most unfortunate wielder. Chakua barely kept from letting out his held breath as annoyingly painful surges of electricity surged down from his sword and into his arm again and again. I am going to turn that fucking brat's skull into a fucking chamber pot for this. Wait, why the fuck am I still maintaining this pain in the ass jutsu when he's getting more use out of it than me? He realized suddenly. Right, that does it. Fuck this noise. Kai. Outside, Naruto blinked in surprise as the edge of the water formation suddenly burst like a popped balloon, sending the formerly contained water flowing out between the trees, though with far less force than when it was initially released. It was just fortunate for Naruto's plans that physical materials created using a person's chakra didn't normally just dissolve and vanish when the jutsu that created them ended. Moments later, a loud, enraged bellow came from where Hoshigaki Chikua had previously been located. You goddamned brat. I'm going to chop off all of your fucking limbs and force you to eat them. As all the clones that had been anywhere near the man's position started to rapidly die off, Naruto hurriedly started to make his way through the hand signs for his single most powerful offensive technique. Tora, Ushi, Suru, Usagi, Hitsugi, Ushi, Uma, Suru, Tora, Inu, Tora, Habi, Tora, Ushi, Suru, Usagi, Tori. Naruto chanted under his breath. He'd only used this jutsu once since he acquired it, simply because there was no place that had both enough pre-existing water that he could regularly practice with it and was isolated enough that he could risk throwing it around without wrecking something important or risk accidentally catching someone else up in the attack. Fortunately, he managed to finish the last hand sign just as his clones retreated into an area that Naruto could see from his own position while being rapidly pursued and slaughtered by a very angry Jonin wielding a very large sword. Suiten. Daibakufu no Jutsu. The Konoha Genin hissed the declaration out with narrowed eyes. The best part of Futon, Doden, and Suiten techniques was that you were able to cut down the chakra cost of a lot of the bigger ones by using pre-existing materials in the environment rather than trying to create them using chakra, even when the actual cost of gathering together said materials offset the discount for larger-scale techniques somewhat. Even with a chakra pool as large as his, Naruto knew he couldn't get away with firing off too many jutsu at this level without managing to defuse the chakra cost somehow. Responding to his chakra, the nearby water rose up from the ground and instantly started gathering together, swirling around and forming into a massive vortex of water that swiftly shot itself straight toward Hoshigaki Chikua. The Mist Nuke Nin's eyes were practically bulging out of their sockets in disbelief as he caught sight of a genin throwing around an A-ranked Suiten jutsu. This is utter bullshit. He roared out before he was completely engulfed by the raging torrent of water, which then proceeded to carve a path of utter devastation through the already badly damaged forest, like some jerk god had decided to poke a finger into the earth and drag it across the ground for shits and giggles. The felled trees and what little greenery that hadn't been swept away by Chikua's own Bakusui Shoha technique was ripped up and shredded by the unrelenting force of the Great Waterfall technique. Unfortunately, several of his clones hadn't been able to clear the area and were unfortunate casualties of the Daibakufu, but that just couldn't be helped. Dispelling them before it hit would have given Chikua too much of a warning about what was coming. As he fought to catch his breath, Naruto absently brought up the jutsu page for the technique that he'd just used. Suiten. Daibakufu no Jutsu Instant LV1, 29.99%. The water release, Great Waterfall technique, despite its name, did not actually originate in Tokigaku and was instead originally developed over 200 years ago in Mizunokuni. The exact clan that originally developed it has since been lost to time, but both the Funato and Hazuka clans, both native to the region and well-known for their powerful water affinities, have laid claim to be the originators of the technique. Whatever the case, in the unknown generations since, it has become a staple among powerful Suiten practitioners across the elemental nations. Because it requires extensive amounts of chakra to utilize, it is widely considered foolish for anyone below the rank of Jonin to even attempt to learn this jutsu. The use of pre-existing water can slightly lower this cost, but even then it remains a chakra-intensive technique. This jutsu can take one of two forms when it's used. The first gathers the water to be used into vortex before firing the rapidly rotating water at target, which adds additional damage to the jutsu. The second is simply gathering a great deal of water together and firing it forward as a single, massive projectile, which makes the technique slightly faster to form and fire. Both forms of this technique will leave the landscape of anything caught in their path looking like it had just been struck by a small tsunami. Even battle-hardened Jonin and cage-level ninja are wary of taking a direct hit from this technique. CP cost, creating water, 1155 CP. CP cost. Pre-existing water manipulation, 1000 CP. Vortex form. Creates a vortex that then launches itself at the enemy and extends 15 meters behind them before ending. Deals int times wis times dex damage to any target or object caught in the vortex's path. High chance of several status afflictions is a result of this version successfully making contact. Vortex takes an additional 3 seconds to form before firing. Projectile form. Launches a vast amount of water at the enemy in the form of a projectile, whether from the user's position or from directly above the target. Deals in time with damage, as well as having a chance to inflict paralysis on the target. The extra time forming the vortex version might have been a risk, but it was well worth the extra damage, especially since Naruto had his clones acting as a distraction to keep his target's attention off him. Finally feeling like he had caught his breath, Naruto made another 40 shadow clones and then drew Kogetsu Kyushiki in anger for the first time. He took just a moment longer to admire the blade before racing forward, tracing the edge of the trench left in the aftermath of his own jutsu, his clones following and flanking him. Holy crap, boss. One clone couldn't help but open its mouth as it goggled at the destruction left in the wake of a single use of his strongest jutsu. This is freaking scary but also kinda awesome. It kinda bites that we clones can't really use this kind of chakra-heavy jutsu on our own. We'll see if that changes once the boss manages to max out the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. I bet we'll really be able to kick some ass when that happens. Another clone offered with a vicious little grin on its lips. RAAARRRGGHHH. A sudden, feral bellow cut off any further comments as the enemy Jonin exploded out of a pile of downed and broken trees, his face a mask of utter and complete fury even as his body looked like it shouldn't have been able to stand up on its own. His jacket and shirt had been utterly shredded by the previous attack, leaving him with only his bandolier remaining, and even that looked like it was one good tug from falling apart, above the waist and showing off a muscular upper body covered in pale blue skin to all and sundry. Every visible part of him was coated in dozens upon dozens of wounds ranging from small cuts and contusions, to lacerations of every imaginable size, to oddly discolored and bulging bits of his flesh that Naruto was pretty sure meant that something underneath the skin had been broken. One of his eyes was swollen shut and, most tellingly, there was a branch piercing through the center of his right arm just below the shoulder, leaving the limb limp and unresponsive even as a heavy stream of blood slowly wept from the injury. A quick application of observe allowed Naruto to see exactly how much damage his enemy had suffered. HP 17,123 44,415. CP 127 4,500. Special status. Impaled right arm is totally unresponsive and cannot be used. Also raises any bleeding status to an additional severity level. Swollen left eye, unable to see out of afflicted eye. Depth perception has been severely compromised, causing a malice to perception. Severe bleeding, 4th stage of the bleeding status effects. Reduces HP by 400 to 500 every 30 seconds until wound is properly tended to or the injured party dies. Berserk lowers all mental stats by 80% to maximum of 20 in exchange for increasing physical stats by half again their total number. Geez, just how tough is this bastard? Naruto cursed out. The blue-skinned nuke nin had somehow managed to tank an A- rank jutsu directly to the face and still had over a quarter of his HP remaining. Jonin were just plain scary. How had he even managed to survive that? Wait, his CP is almost empty as well. Did he manage to pull out some last-minute jutsu like to try and blunt or counter the impact of my own technique hitting him head-on? How did he manage to do that when he was caught in the middle of a freaking water vortex? Geez, Jonin really or something else. To add to Naruto's annoyance, the man had also managed to keep a grip on Kuribaki as well, though now he was holding it in his left hand rather than his right for obvious reasons. Whether or not he could still effectively use the massive weapon one-handed, and while using his non-dominant hand to boot, was still up in the air, but Naruto wasn't going to underestimate this guy, not after the sheer resilience he'd just shown off. Is he just chopping away at all of the fallen trees right now? One of the shadow clones deadpanned in disbelief as, rather than try and rush them, the enraged shadow swordsman of the mist had instead started to randomly swing his massive blade into the fallen trees around him, smashing and carving them into kindling and splinters. Yeah, the light might still be on, but I'm pretty sure that no one is at home up there. Naruto stated flatly. Still, the man would likely snap out of it eventually, so he wasn't about to waste the opportunity that he'd just been presented with. Time to go in, boys. You got a plan, boss? One clone asked. Just one. Attack. The genin grinned ferally. My way. Huffing for breath as some of the red finally bled out of his single working eye, Chikua glared down at the kindling that had once been several felled trees while muttering a variety of invectives under his breath. How in the name of all the gods had a goddamned fucking genin managed to pull off an A-rank jutsu? Uzumaki or no Uzumaki, there was no way a brat that young should have reserves that big. Kisame, the biggest chakra monster in existence, didn't even have reserves that big at that age. Hell, even now, Chikua himself couldn't pull off a Daibikufu that easily. To be entirely fair, that was mostly due to the fact that he had still been learning that particular technique when Kisame had turned traitor and made him and the rest of the clan Yugura's latest target of choice, forcing Chikua and most of his kinsmen to flee for their lives. And the life of a missing nin is hard enough without also trying to practice and train with a particularly flashy, expensive, and destructive ninjutsu. But still, it pissed him off to no end that a fucking goddamn genin was better at using a jutsu than he was. The sound of multiple feet racing towards him made Chikua's scowl deepen as he whirled around to face the origin of the sound. Just as he'd expected, more damn clones. What the hell was this kid? Some kind of infinite chakra battery or something? Briefly he considered making a run for it. He was in rough shape and he needed to get somewhere safe fast if he wanted to have any hopes of saving his right arm. Then his pride reminded him that he would be running from a genin and he instantly kicked the idea to the curb. No way, he'd rather cut off both of his arms with a dull kunai than ever have to swallow that kind of disgrace. Raising his sword, Chikua pointed Kiribaki at the oncoming swarm of blondes. I'm going to tear every last one of you to pieces. Take that memory back to your damned creator, you useless little pieces of shit. Yes, he was well aware about the whole memory transference thing that the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu had. The jutsu itself was rather well known as one of the more infamous creations of the Nadaime Hokage, but the most anyone below a seasoned chunin would know about it was that it was a stupidly chakra-intensive clone jutsu. Those who got enough seasoning and experience would eventually learn that it was probably the single most useful jutsu for scouting and reconnaissance in existence for those who were actually capable of using it effectively. You first. The clones shouted back in unison as they leapt towards him as a swarm with tanto drawn. Even down to a single arm, even battered and half-dead like he was, Chikua was still a jonin fighting against a genin. There was no way he was going to go down against a bunch of fucking clones. With a roar of challenge, Chikua countercharged the clone horde with his blade drawn back. He might not have been ambidextrous, but he was still a master swordsman and thus far above the clones in terms of skill even when forced to rely on just his offhand. And with the added range that Kiribaki gave him, he was able to cut through all of the little bastards before they could get close enough to him to even try and make use of those little knives of theirs. Which was apparently a very good thing, considering that, once they were closer, he could hear the distinctive low-pitched shriek of the Futon Chakra Nagashi Jutsu coming from those tanto blades. Given that the kid's Jonin sensei was none other than the infamous Smoking Guardian, it honestly didn't surprise him that the kid knew how to use that particular jutsu. All it did was reaffirm his desire to squash all these runts before they could even try and get close enough to try and use the second sharpest Chakra Nagashi Jutsu on him. He was already bleeding quite enough, damn it. The sound of the ground rumbling slightly beneath his feet made Chikua pause for just a moment as he cut down the last clone before he rapidly readjusted himself. Sure enough, what he was convinced was the genuine brat himself soon erupted from the ground just a few feet behind him. Nice try. The ninja swordsman roared, twisting himself around and executing a backhanded cut that was aimed at bisecting the little bastard at the waist. As Kiribaki's teeth bit into him, a puff of chakra smoke engulfed his body before a loud metallic clang echoed through the air. From the bottom of the smoke, two halves of a very familiar item fell to the ground with a slight thud. A kunai. Chikua couldn't believe his eyes. One had to absolutely master the Kawarimi no Jutsu to substitute with anything that had a mass much smaller than the user, one of the reasons logs and dummies were such common targets for the technique. That was the kind of skill level that took years of effort for someone to reach, if one even bothered to take it that far. Just what the hell was this kid? Some kind of hidden Jonin in disguise. Up here, asshole. A familiar voice called, turning his attention upward and catching sight of said impossible brat pointing the gauntlet that covered his right arm down at him. Karakuri coat. Kemiridama Ute. Trick gauntlet. Smoke bomb fire. And less than an instant later, a small ball struck him directly in his already sore and swollen eye, making him howl in pain even as his good eye closed instinctively. Then the little thing fucking exploded and he was suddenly completely covered in a slate gray cloud so thick he couldn't see his nose on the end of his face. And he could already hear the faint sound of the futon chakra nagashi thrumming in the air again. The little bastard thought a half-assed trick like this was going to be enough to take him down. Get real. Chikua roared out, his remaining eye going wide and bloodshot as his blood hammered through his veins. He was absolutely done with this fucking bullshit fight. He could clearly remember where the little pissant had been standing before he blinded him, and he was a fucking Kiri ninja. He'd been trained to fight by ear in the endless mists of Kurigakure itself since his days as a fucking academy student. As soon as he heard that little bastard's feet hit the ground, he was done for. A heartbeat passed, then another, and then the sudden sharp snap of twig being stepped on triggered the tension in Chikua's body. With a wordless roar, he swung out toward the location of the sound, making the rookie mistake of overextending himself in his blind anger, but still feeling completely satisfied as he felt his blade connect, until he heard the now familiar poof of a clone being dispelled. God fucking damn it all. Futon Chakra Nagashi. Danto. A voice that he was truly starting to hate shouted from directly behind him. The low shriek of the Chakra Nagashi jutsu instantly changed into an ear-splitting roar as the fucking smoke was finally dispersed, allowing Chikua to turn his head and catch sight of what was happening behind him as he fought to regain his footing. His eyes instantly locked onto the blonde brat swinging a massive wind sword the size of Kuribaki down at him. And he was still only halfway recovered from his swing, so there was no way he could dodge in time. I have to block it. The Nuke Nin thought in a desperate panic, half turning and attempting to interpose Kuribaki in between himself and the incoming sword attack, but only managing to partially succeed. A single tooth managed to intersect with the wind sword and was quickly shorn in half as the blade continued its descent unhindered, shearing his left arm off at the elbow and sending his forearm and hand, still clutching desperately at Kuribaki's hilt, to fall to the ground with a dull thump. Quote ellipsis exclamation mark question mark quote. Even in his own mind, Chikua was left in utter, dumbfounded shock as he stared at the stump that his arm had been reduced to. On the left, ironically enough. Then, white-hot rage quickly washed away the pain and shock away. For a missing nin, losing a limb was as good as a death sentence, even more than it would be for a normal village shinobi. Without both hands, a ninja would lose the ability to form hand signs and, unless they'd already mastered the extremely difficult and time-consuming art of learning to form seals one-handed, would thus lose all access to two of the main tools of a ninja's trade, ninjutsu and genjutsu. I am going to murder you, you damned little fuck. He snarled out at the blonde bastard, whose futon technique was quickly dispersing. I don't care if I have to rip out your throat with my teeth, I am going to make you regret ever being fucking born. Oh yeah. Come over here and prove it then, tough guy. The Uzumaki brat snarked back with a cocky smirk on his face, brandishing the kodachi as he assumed a balanced ready stance. Snarling in utter rage, Chikua twisted his neck and ripped the topmost of his Kurigakure kunai out of his bandolier with his teeth. The action was too much for the abused garment, causing it to rip and fall apart, leaving him naked save for his tattered shinobi trousers and sandals. With a chomp of his teeth to adjust his grip, the Nuke Nin glowered at the brat that had cost him both his life as a ninja and his pride as a swordsman. Even if he was likely going to die today, he was damn sure going to drag this brat down to hell with him if it was the last thing he did. Naruto activated the Futon Chakra Nagashi, causing a pale blue aura to appear around Kogetsu Kyushiki's blade once more even as the distinctive wind shriek became audible again. This battle was just about over and only one of them was going to be walking away from it, and Naruto intended it to be him. Chikua moved first, knowing that he was bleeding out and wanting to be damned sure he at least gutted this little bastard before he fell, and charged forwards with a muffled roar of anger. Even with both of his arms either crippled or completely gone, he was still a ninja and he could still stab a bastard with a kunai or stomp their skull into paste with his legs. Tora Gari. But then, in between 1 second and the next, Chikua was barely able to catch sight of a blur of motion moving past him and then, thanks in no small part to the debilitating injuries he'd suffered and the already lethal levels of blood loss he'd sustained, he was just able to hear one final phrase. Ansatsujutsu. Zanshuzen. Then there was a dull flare pain in his neck and the world started to spin. Then he was looking up at his own decapitated body as it collapsed forward, blood weakly fountaining from his headless neck for a brief instant. Little fucker. Hoshigaki Chikua, formerly a jonin of Kurigakure no Sato, still refused to admit defeat even as he watched his own body fall dead to the ground. I won't stop. I'll get you. Then darkness crept over his vision as he finally left the mortal coil.